Chapter 139. Staring at the spiritual furnace, old Mo was frowning and thinking. There was only one last key link left. If it could be solved, the spiritual furnace could be successfully transformed and the Zing battleship would be reborn. However, the last link was also very difficult. Old Mo was not sure that he could succeed at present. He was thinking about how to ensure the maximum success rate. When Lin came, old Mo was a little impatient. Like other spiritual tattooists, old Mo hated to be disturbed when he was working hard. Fortunately, it was Lin who came. If it was someone else, he would have been scolded and driven away by old Mo. "You want me to refine a short crossbow for you?" Old Mo was stunned when he understood Lin's purpose. Then he became interested. He patted his thin chest and said straightforwardly, "That's easy. Leave it to me. You did me a big favor last time, and I haven't had time to thank you. I feel sorry for that. Let me make it up to you this time. I'm sure I'll refine a fine crossbow for you." Lin soon cast a glance at young man in the distance as if to say, "Look, I'm not being treacherous. Old Mo still wants to return the favor." Young man curled her lips and ignored him. "What kind of crossbow do you want to refine? 7-star crossbow? Holy crossbow? Repeating crossbow? Or bloody armor-piercing crossbow?" Old Mo asked quickly. What he mentioned was the standard crossbow of the Empire, which was a low-grade spiritual weapon of human rank. It was powerful enough for a practitioner in martial realm like Lin Sun. After thinking for a while, Lin Sun spread out a piece of white paper and took an inscribing pen dipped in ink. Soon, he drew many complicated spiritual tattoos. Finally, he drew a very common crossbow which was shaped like a cylinder and had a delicate handle at the end. "That's what I want to refine. It seems to be called Meteor's crossbow," Lin Sun said with uncertainty. Before leaving the mine prison, Master Lu gave Lin Sun an ancient animal skin scroll and a dark gray inscribing pen. Later, the two treasures merged together by chance and turned into the gate to heaven suspended in the sea of consciousness. However, in the past, there were many spiritual tattoos recorded in the ancient animal skin scroll, which was like the personal notes of a spiritual tattooist. It had been treasured by Master Lu for a long time. Lin had been following Master Lu since he was a child, so he knew the contents of the book by heart. For example, the spiritual tattoo of Meteor's crossbow was recorded in this book. Of course, these were only spiritual tattoos. Master Lu had created the Meteor's crossbow according to these spiritual tattoos. Lin Sun had learned how to refine it, but he did not have the ability to refine a spiritual weapon at that time. Knowing it was one thing and actually refining it was another. For example, he instructed old Mo to transform the spiritual furnace of Zing battleship, which required a lot of spiritual tattoo formations. He could explain the mystery of it, but it was impossible for him to inscribe and refine them by himself at present. This was the gap between a spirit rune apprentice and a spirit rune grandmaster. It was easier to know than to do. Lin Sun, who was recalling the past, did not notice that old Mo beside him was staring at the spiritual tattoo formation on the white paper as if he was staring at a peerless treasure. His skinny face was full of surprise, shock, trance, and ecstasy. Lin Sun did not notice it, but young man did. She was keenly aware that something was wrong, but she did not know anything about spiritual tattoos, so she could only watch, not daring to disturb old Mo. She could see that old Mo was immersed in the spiritual tattoo. Disturbing him at this time was more painful than killing him. But what made young man curious was what kind of crossbow Lin Sun was going to refine that made old Mo so excited. 3 days passed in a flash. The quarterly assessment would begin tomorrow. All trainees in all 20 camps were stepping up their preparations. The material warehouse of each camp became the most popular place. Everyone was clear that it was impossible to kill a barbarian soldier comparable to a practitioner in gang spirit realm without some powerful spiritual weapons and equipment in a one-on-one fight. In order not to be eliminated, Every trainee did not hesitate to spend points, and almost cleared out all the spiritual weapons in the material warehouse to show off. Armors, inner armors, wrist guards, shoulder pads, boots, shields, crossbows, spiritual bows, all became the objects of crazy competition. Especially the crossbow, it became the most popular spiritual weapon for exchange. It was easy to understand that the crossbow had a long range and great lethality. It did not need to consume spiritual energy at all. As long as it was used properly, it could cause great harm to a barbarian soldier. Unfortunately, there were not many crossbows in each camp, and the points needed to exchange for them were extremely high. Therefore, only a small number of trainees could have them. Yi Chi, who already had a bloody armor-piercing crossbow, felt lucky that he had exchanged for it in the first monthly assessment. Naturally, he did not need to compete with others for it. But Yi Chi and other trainees in the camp all knew that it was impossible to kill a barbarian soldier with one shot with these imperial crossbows. Barbarian soldiers were not target. They had the fighting capacity comparable to a practitioner in Gang Spirit Realm, and their fighting skills and experience were not inferior to those in Gang Spirit Realm. Standard crossbows could at most cause some harm to them unexpectedly. This also meant that the main show depended on each trainee's real strength. In Old Mo's warehouse, Old Mo stroked the meteor's crossbow that had just been refined, feeling the coldness on the surface of the crossbow with his fingertip. He looked unspeakably excited. He had never imagined that a crossbow could have so many spiritual tattoos and such a fascinating and exquisite structure. In the past empires, he had never seen a crossbow like Meteor's crossbow, which was only a low-grade spiritual weapon of human rank but had such a complex spiritual tattoo structure. It was conceivable that its power was destined to be far beyond ordinary. Meteor's crossbow was matched with 24 starry frost arrows with spiritual tattoos. The arrows were only 6 inches long and as sharp shuttles. On their surface, there were fine spirals of spiritual tattoos like flowing water, glowing with a frightening cold light. Although the power of Meteor's crossbow and starry frost arrows hadn't been specifically tested, Old Mo could already imagine how amazing its power would be. The only shortcoming was that the cost of making Meteor's crossbow was too high. The spiritual materials and spiritual ink alone were worth 800 imperial silver coins. If the efforts of a spiritual tattooist were added, the price would be even higher. It's a pity that ordinary spiritual tattooists can't make it, and the cost is too high. Otherwise, it could be mass-produced and equipped for every army of the Empire. In that case, the military strength of the Empire will be upgraded to a higher level. Old Mo sighed with a little regret. When young man learned the power of Meteor's crossbow from Old Mo, she couldn't help being shocked and distracted. This thing was a great killing weapon. She looked at Lin Sun in a strange way. How many secrets did this boy have in his head? How could he take out such amazing treasures inadvertently? Lin Sun didn't explain anything. He took the Meteor's crossbow from Old Mo's hand and turned away. The quarterly assessment would begin tomorrow, and he had to prepare well. This boy's master is a great master. His attainments in spiritual tattoos are at least at the level of a guru. No, even a guru can't match him. At least, the damn old guy in Green Deer School can't develop such a unique crossbow. Old Mo sighed with emotion. Where do you think his master comes from? The 4 aristocratic families of spiritual tattoos? Or a hidden clan? Young man asked curiously. She knew that the damn old guy, in Old Mo's words, was the culprit who forced Old Mo to run to the bloodthirsty camp to avoid trouble. Similarly, he was a famous spiritual tattooist in the Empire. Old Mo should say that Lin's master was more powerful than him. Could be imagined how amazing it was. I can't guess. At least I've never seen anyone who can refine Meteor's crossbow or improve the spiritual furnace of Zing battleship. Old Mo frowned and pondered for a long time. But he couldn't think of anyone who could do this. I'm going to find Chief Shu. Suddenly, young man thought of something and turned away. What are you going to do? Old Mo was stunned. I want to make a bet with him. When the voice sounded, young man's slender and graceful figure had disappeared out of the warehouse. In the central camp of the bloodthirsty camp, the quarterly assessment would be held tomorrow. The drill masters of the 20 camps and some strongmen in the camps were summoned. Sitting in the center, Shu Sanchi glanced around like a sharp blade and said, "Fourth 9, have you finished selecting the barbarian soldiers?" A tower-like burly middle-aged man stood up and said in a muffled voice, "We've just caught them from the front line. I can guarantee that they are all first-level barbarian soldiers." Shu Sanchi nodded and said, "In order to prevent accidents, everyone must be on guard in the quarterly assessment tomorrow to ensure that no trainee dies in the hands of barbarian soldiers." Everyone nodded in unison. Shu Sanchi thought for a while and suddenly asked, "Who do you think is the first one to kill a barbarian soldier among the 600 trainees in the 20 camps?" His words caused many instructors and powerhouses present to reveal a look of contemplation. "Of course it's Bai Lingshur of our Camp 7. A bearded man said without hesitation, and many people present nodded. Indeed, Bai Lingshur had the talent of Starshine Eternal, and was the most eye-catching girl in the entire bloodthirsty camp. But the drill masters of other camps all showed a touch of dissatisfaction. Bai Lingshur is really good, but when it comes to combat lethality, he is a little worse than Zhao Yin of our Camp 15. Zhao Yin? Humph, the body of Purple Sun is indeed powerful, but Zhang Sun Heng of our Camp 22 is not inferior to him." As more and more people spoke, the scene suddenly became noisy. They were not convinced and argued with each other until their faces turned red. Chapter 140. Quarrels rose and fell one after another. Their faces turned red and they almost rolled up their sleeves to fight with each other. Shu Sanchi couldn't help but frown slightly. He glanced around and suddenly found that young Ku had been sitting there in silence. He couldn't help but ask, "Young Ku, is there any trainee in your Camp 39 who can kill a barbarian soldier in the first time?" His voice was as sharp as a sword and as sonorous as the sound of metal colliding. As soon as it came out, it suppressed the quarrels on the scene and made many people look at young Ku. Some people were curious, some disapproved, and some were even eager to refute young Ku rudely after she said a name. Young Ku was stunned. Obviously, she didn't expect that Shu Sanchi would ask her about the situation of Camp 39 at this time. After thinking for a while, young Ku finally shook her head. In the entire Camp 39, there were many top trainees, such as Gong Ming, Shi Yu, Ning Meng, Qi Kan, etc., but compared with Bai Lingshur and Zhao Yin, they were slightly inferior. For example, Gong Ming's defensive power was amazing, but his frontal attack power was slightly inferior. And Shi Yu was good at the strategy of detour. He would often wait for a chance to kill a barbarian soldier in one blow. This strategy was undoubtedly the most terrible, but it was also difficult to kill a barbarian soldier in the first time. Ning Meng and Qi Kan were strong in frontal combat, but trainees like Bai Lingshur and Zhao Yin, who had talent attributes, were destined to have more advantages than them. After thinking for a long time, young Ku finally didn't answer a name. This made many people who were ready to refute young Ku slightly disappointed, and some people chuckled, as if they had already guessed that young Ku would say so. It is indeed a little difficult to judge which trainee can kill a barbarian soldier in the shortest time. Maybe we can get a clear answer when the quarterly assessment starts tomorrow," Shu Sanchi said in a low voice. He was about to end the meeting. At this moment, a slender figure in red rushed in and said, "Chief Shu, I think the first one to kill a barbarian soldier among the 600 trainees in 20 camps must be from Camp 39. Along with the voice, young man had already appeared at the scene. Her figure was graceful and curvaceous, and coupled with her sexy and beautiful face, the eyes of many present lit up as soon as she appeared. But when they heard the content of young man's words clearly, many people frowned and became restless. Her words excluded all trainees except those from Camp 39, which was too belittling. Even young Ku couldn't help frowning. When she saw young man, a trace of coldness appeared on her delicate and white face. At this time, when young man mentioned her Camp 39, young Ku still felt uncomfortable even though she knew that young man was standing up for her. At this time, someone couldn't help sneering, "Young man, we all know the situation of Camp 39. Your words are too ridiculous." The others also said, "Yeah, tell us which trainee in Camp 39 can do it?" Their voices more or less carried a wisp of ridicule and disapproval. Shu Sanchi frowned and said, "Young man, don't make trouble." In the past, Shu Sanchi's words were enough to make young man retreat obediently. But today, she was different from her usual self. She walked to the conference table, glanced at the crowd with her watery eyes, and said with a chuckle, "Since you want to know, I won't hide it. The trainee I'm talking about is Lin Sun from Camp 39. Lin Sun? There was a moment of silence, and many people were confused. Who was this guy? Why hadn't they heard of this name before? Young Ku originally thought that young man would talk about someone, but she didn't expect that young man would mention Lin Sun's name. She couldn't help feeling surprised, and then she became angry. Did young man deliberately come to make trouble today? Of course, she knew that young man had a good relationship with Lin Sun. But no matter how good their relationship was, how could she talk irresponsibly at this moment? "Drill Master Young Ku, who is Lin Sun?" Someone couldn't help asking. Young Ku thought for a while and decided to tell the truth. Lin Sun is indeed a trainee of Camp 39, but he has just reached the 8th level of martial realm. Although his fighting capacity is excellent, to be honest, I'm not sure whether he can kill a barbarian soldier in the first place. Hearing this, many people's expressions became strange. The 8th level of martial realm? It was really not easy for him to persist in bloodthirsty camp with such a cultivation. But no one could believe that such a guy could be the first to kill a barbarian soldier in the shortest time. Besides, young Ku was the drill master of Camp 39. Even she didn't have confidence in Lin Sun, so who would believe young man's words? "Young man, are you joking with us?" Someone had already laughed. Hey, the 8th level of martial realm? Young man, do you like this guy? Why do I feel something is wrong? Others also joined in the uproar, and took the opportunity to tease young man. Seeing the scene becoming more and more noisy and chaotic, Shu Sanchi felt unhappy. But before he opened his mouth, young man suddenly laughed and said, "Guys, why don't we have a bet? If I win, each of you will take out 1,000 points. If I lose, each of you will also give 1,000 points." Everyone was dumbfounded. Was young man being serious? Ha, young man, don't be angry. There are 50 or 60 people here. If you lose, you will have to pay 50 or 60,000 points. As far as I know, you have less than 20,000 points now, right? Someone laughed. As long as you dare to bet, I promise I won't owe you 1 point. Young man's starry eyes flickered, but her words revealed a trace of determination. Enough! Young Ku, who had endured for a long time, finally couldn't bear it any more. She suddenly stood up and stared at young man coldly. "If you make trouble again, you will disappear from here now." The whole place was silent. Everyone knew that the relationship between the twin sisters was now like fire and water because of what happened in those years. Young man's pretty face froze, and a trace of unspeakable complexity appeared in the depths of her starry eyes. Finally, she said with a smile, "Young Ku, I can give in on other things, but I must insist on this to the end." As she said, she looked at Shu Sanchi and said, "Of course, Chief Shu, if you are willing, you can also participate in the bet." Unexpectedly, Shu Sanchi raised his eyes and stared at young man for a long time, and finally nodded, "Okay." It was merely a single word, yet it was like a decree, and it caused everyone present to be astounded. All of them had various expressions on their faces, and each of them had their own thoughts. Humph! Young Ku turned around and left with a frosty face. Seeing this, young man felt a trace of bitterness in her heart, but she still showed an indifferent look on her face, as if she had long been accustomed to her sister's treatment. Soon, the people in the camp dispersed, leaving only young man and Shu Sanchi. "Why do you do this?" Shu Sanchi asked, staring at young man with his sharp eyes, revealing an indescribable oppressive force. "Because I know Lin can definitely do it." Young man raised her head, and her beautiful face was full of firmness. She didn't give in at all. "I want to know the real reason," Shu Sanchi said in a low voice. "You should know that once you lose the bet, your points are not enough to support you to leave the bloodthirsty camp in at least 10 years. This is the real reason." Young man looked very stubborn. Shu Sanchi rubbed his eyebrows, seeming to be a little dispirited. He waved his hand and said, "You are not a little girl anymore. You have to bear the consequences of what you have done. You can go now. See you tomorrow." Young man waved her hand with a smile and turned away. But she was not as relaxed as she looked. She kept muttering in her heart, "Handsome boy, I'm going all out this time. Whether I can make a comeback or not depends on you. You must win." Shu Sanchi sat alone for a long time, and finally got up. He decided to have a good talk with young Ku. He didn't want the broken relationship between the two sisters to be destroyed because of this matter. That night, Lin learned all this from young man. He couldn't help but be stunned. After a long time, he said with a bitter smile, "Sister young man, you really think highly of me." Young man sighed with hidden bitterness and said weakly, "In my heart you are the best. If you can't do it this time, I will be buried in the bloodthirsty camp for the rest of my life. Do you have the heart to do that?" Hearing young man's bitter tone, Lin soon got goosebumps all over his body. He hurriedly begged for mercy. "Okay, I'll try my best not to let you down." Young man stared at him, and the hidden bitterness disappeared. Instead, she became murderous and said, "What do you mean by your best? You must do it." Lin touched his nose and was speechless. What else could he say? The next morning, in a desert 300 miles away from the bloodthirsty camp, 20 huge fighting areas had been set up. Each area was further divided into 30 battle arenas. The quarterly assessment would be held here. Each of the 20 camps corresponded to a fighting area. The 30 trainees in each camp had a special fighting arena. At dawn, the trainees of Camp 39, led by young Ku, came to the easternmost fighting area. In the spacious and huge fighting area, there were 30 fighting arenas with a metallic luster, and each arena had a scope of 100 feet. When Lin Sun and the others arrived, they saw an iron cage placed on each arena, in which fire barbarians with different appearances were imprisoned. These fire barbarians were all emitting a ferocious aura, as if they were terrifying beasts that had been imprisoned and were about to devour people. Barbarian soldiers. They were all voodoo barbarians with the cultivation of Gang's spirit realm. From the bloody and fierce chi released from them, it could be judged that they were all battle-hardened and covered with blood. They were not ordinary characters at all. Seeing this scene, many trainees became serious. Even if they were far away, they couldn't help but feel cold when their eyes met those barbarian soldiers. The opponents of this quarterly assessment were really abnormal. Chapter 141. There was still a quarter of an hour before the quarterly assessment began. Trainees in each camp were waiting quietly and trying to adjust to the best fighting state. This time, their opponents were very abnormal. Once they failed to pass the assessment, they would be eliminated from the bloodthirsty camp. Under such circumstances, no one dared to be careless. Lin Sun was also silently watching the fighting ring in the distance. Looking at the strong fire barbarians imprisoned in the cages, some information about the fire barbarians emerged in his mind. "Hey, the bet is nonsense that the guy is the first to succeed? It's the biggest joke in the world." Suddenly, an ear-piercing sneer sounded out. Lin Sun didn't need to look back to know that the guy referred to himself. He was even very clear that many trainees nearby looked at him with a touch of ridicule and disdain. Even Shi Yu and Ning Meng looked surprised and doubtful. All of this came from young man's bet. In just one night, it spread throughout the bloodthirsty camp and caused an uproar. Lin Sun also became the most eye-catching trainee in the whole bloodthirsty camp and was talked about with all kinds of doubts and disdain. Camp 39 was no exception. Although Lin Sun had already proved himself through various efforts and made his points rank in the top ranks, most people wouldn't believe that he could be the first trainee to kill a barbarian soldier in this quarterly assessment. In their opinion, the bet was just nonsense. In Camp 39, Gong Ming, Shi Yu, Ning Meng and Qi Kan were all stronger than Lin Sun. Even Li Qiu, Mao Lengshan, Yi Qi and others were not inferior to him at all. Under such circumstances, no one would believe that Lin Sun could do it. Most importantly, this was the quarterly assessment, a competition among the whole 20 camps. There were also many overmatches in other camps, many of whom were more powerful than Lin Sun. And trainees like Bai Lingshi, Zhao Yin, Zhang Sun Heng and Li Duxing, who had long been famous in the bloodthirsty camp, were far beyond Lin Sun's reach. With such a comparison, no one would take this bet seriously. It was like a ridiculous farce, and it would only make people laugh at it. Even Shi Yu and Ning Meng were shocked when they heard the news, as if they had seen a ghost. They grabbed Lin Sun and asked him for a long time, wondering if he was out of his mind. How could he participate in such an absurd bet? Lin Sun could only smile bitterly. How could he say that all this was caused by young man? Therefore, at this moment, Lin Sun could only turn a deaf ear to all kinds of gazes and sneers from time to time. Lin Sun, can you do it or not? Ning Meng came over and looked Lin Sun up and down. He frowned and said, "Look at you. Except for a saber and a broken crossbow, you don't have any spiritual equipment. Look at others, who are not armed to the teeth." Lin Sun was in a trance. He turned his head and glanced around. As expected, he found that except for him, almost all the other trainees in Camp 39 were covered with spiritual weapons, such as armors, shoulder guards, wrist guards, boots, sabers, crossbows, and spiritual bows. Everyone was like a shelf of spiritual weapons, releasing bright and dazzling spiritual light. So exaggerated? Lin Sun's eyes widened when he didn't observe them carefully. In order to pass this quarterly assessment, these guys really spent a lot of money. Even people like Ning Meng, Shi Yu, and Qi Kan, without exception, were all well equipped. All this made Lin Sun sigh with emotion in his heart. If it were in a real battlefield, as long as he stripped these guys of their spiritual weapons, he would become rich overnight and buy a house in the Forbidden City. Ning Meng suddenly felt uncomfortable all over. He felt that Lin Sun was looking at him like a profiteer staring at a little fat sheep. "Are you listening to me or not?" Ning Meng said angrily. "Oh, nothing. I should have some confidence," Lin Sun said casually. Except for a saber and a meteor's crossbow, he had no other spiritual equipment. But he didn't worry about anything. "I'm worried about you, but you still look absent-minded." Ning Meng became more and more angry. "Well, it's up to you. If you dare to fail this assessment, I'll beat you to death." After that, he left angrily. Seeing Ning Meng leave, Lin Sun felt helpless. Looking at the meteor's crossbow in his hand, he thought to himself, "Even without it, it's impossible that I can't pass the assessment, right?" While waiting, in the assessment areas where other camps were located, people were also talking about the bet about Lin Sun. All kinds of comments, such as sneering, disdain, surprise, and ridicule, were heard incessantly. Some people even felt indignant, thinking that Lin Sun was too arrogant and dared to look down on the heroes in the world. He should really be beaten up and taught an unforgettable lesson. As for the dazzling top trainees like Bai Lingshi, Zhao Yin, Zhang Sunheng, and Li Duxing, they also heard about the bet, but they all regarded it as a joke and didn't care about it at all. Only a clown could make such a farce. If they paid attention to it, they would belittle themselves. There was a temporary central campsite outside the various test areas, and it was built on a low hill. Standing on top of it, one could see the different test areas from afar. It's not too late for you to regret. Shu Sanchi withdrew his gaze and said slowly. Chief Shu, do you think I'm the kind of person who will regret at the last minute? I think you will definitely suffer a setback in front of me this time. Young man chuckled, her sexy and beautiful face full of confidence. Shu Sanchi narrowed his eyes and looked at young man who was smiling sweetly and calm beside him. Finally, he chose to keep silent. A quarter of an hour later, the bell rang and the assessment began. In the assessment area of Camp 39, trainees climbed onto the arenas one by one. Suddenly, light curtains appeared around the arenas, covering the entire arena. In this way, trainees on the arenas couldn't see the fighting situation on other arenas, which also prevented their fights from being affected by the fights of other trainees. With a calm look, Lin Sun climbed onto one of the arenas and stood there quietly. His tall and handsome figure had a kind of outstanding temperament, as if he was out of this world. Lin Sun looked at the opposite side quietly, where the strong fire barbarian in the cage was roaring ferociously. Little human bastard, I'm Bafu, a fire barbarian warrior. I've killed many little bastards like you. If you're afraid, just give me your heart, and I'll let you die more quickly and painlessly. The strong fire barbarian who called himself Bafu was a middle-aged man with a gloomy look. His eyes were like a pair of bloody flames burning, releasing a bloodthirsty and violent breath. Even if he was imprisoned in the cage, Bafu's breath was still extremely terrible. It was indeed a unique breath that could only be possessed by those who had experienced hundreds of battles. If it were some timid practitioners in the real martial realm, they would be frightened to the point of collapse. But Lin Sun seemed to be unaware of it. He looked at the opponent quietly with a pair of deep black eyes full of indifference. Voodoo barbarians were the biggest enemies of the Empire. They were cruel, tyrannical, and barbaric. In the previous wars, every time they captured a city of the Empire, they would carry out a large-scale massacre ceremony to pay tribute to the voodoo barbarian god they believed in. In their hearts, human beings were as cheap as livestock, the dirtiest and most despicable garbage in the world, and the blasphemers that the voodoo barbarian god could not tolerate. Under such circumstances, it was conceivable that Lin Sun could not have any good impression on voodoo barbarians. Ha ha, little bastard, have you been scared to death? You're so fucking useless. You dare not even fart. You human beings are so cowardly. Bafu laughed ferociously and slapped the iron cage with his hands, arrogant and fierce. I can see that you're eager to die. Lin Sun thought for a while and said, I understand your desire to die. After all, you voodoo barbarians are all stupid. A stupid made Bafu suddenly furious. His eyes turned red and he roared fiercely. Lin Sun was finally convinced that what drill master Shu Sanchi said before was right. It was very easy to irritate a strong voodoo barbarian. It was enough to scold them for being stupid. They had been trying to wash away the infamy of being stupid for hundreds of years, but they never got what they wanted. The reason was a long story. In short, it was just an infamy, which was not a big deal at all, but it was regarded as the greatest shame by the strong voodoo barbarians. Perhaps this was the thing that stupid people would care about. It also proved that voodoo barbarians were really stupid. Clang. Suddenly, the bell for the beginning of the quarterly assessment rang. With the bell, the iron cage that imprisoned the strong fire barbarian was automatically opened. With a bang, Bafu, who had been almost mad with anger, rushed out at the first time, with terrible flames surging around him. Little bastard, go to hell! Bafu, like a god of slaughter, jumped up and came across the sky. He held the terrible and dazzling flame in his hands and smashed at Lin Sun fiercely. Boom, the air was burned, and the terrible power waves swept over like angry waves. The void was full of deafening explosions. This was the combat effectiveness comparable to that of a strong practitioner in gang spirit realm. Once he launched an attack, The power was enough to be a fatal threat to any strong practitioner in martial realm. Lin Sun's skin was tingling, and he couldn't help but squint his eyes. He could feel the terror of this blow, and even he didn't have the confidence to resist it. But Lin Sun didn't move a step from beginning to end. His eyes were firmly fixed on the figure of the opponent and the trajectory of the attack. When the opponent rushed to him in the air, Lin Sun suddenly raised his right hand, and a seemingly ordinary black crossbow was held in his left palm. At the same time, the fingertips of his right hand hooked the trigger steadily and accurately. Bang! In an instant, a strand of a strange sound that sounded like the low hum of a flute resounded. Ba Fu, who was in the air, showed a touch of disdain. A crossbow? And you want to use this thing to kill me? Ridiculous. On the battlefield, he didn't know how many human bastards who tried to sneak attack him with crossbows. Of course, he wouldn't put such an attack in his eyes. But just a moment later, Ba Fu's pupils suddenly shrank. He suddenly realized that something was wrong. This crossbow seemed to be different from what he had seen before because, in his field of vision, there suddenly appeared silver starlight blooming like fireworks, dazzling and beautiful to the extreme, almost suffocating him. What was this? Ba Fu felt an extremely strong sense of danger from the bottom of his heart, and his soul trembled violently. The incomparably beautiful starlight almost made his body and mind fall into it. Chapter 142. Before the monthly assessment began, young Ku and Fatty Middle-Aged had already stood outside the assessment area, and their eyes fell on one of the arenas intentionally or unintentionally. This bet. Hey, it's really interesting. Fatty Middle-Aged's expression was slightly strange. It's ridiculous. Only she can do this kind of thing. Young Ku frowned, and a touch of sullen appeared on her delicate and white facial features. Even now, she still couldn't forgive all this. You can't say that. Don't forget that Lin Sun has been with old Mo these days. Maybe young man saw some possibility, so she did such a thing regardless of everything. Fatty Middle-Aged comforted her in a gentle voice. Old Mo. Young Ku's pretty face became colder. If he dares to help Lin Sun cheat, I'll be the first one who won't spare him. Fatty Middle-Aged had a headache. Young Ku obviously hated young man to the core, and her firm attitude couldn't be changed at all. He said helplessly, "Do you have no confidence in Lin Sun?" Young Ku was stunned, and after a moment of silence she said, "He should be able to pass this monthly assessment, but do you believe that he can be the first one to kill a barbarian soldier?" Fatty Middle-Aged thought about it carefully, and finally smiled bitterly and said with some uncertainty, "Maybe there will be an unexpected miracle?" Young Ku frowned, glanced at Fatty Middle-Aged coldly, and said, "Even you don't believe it, and you still come to persuade me? The miracle you mentioned, in my opinion." Before she finished her words, she suddenly narrowed her eyes looking at the arena in the distance, and she was stunned. Almost at the same time, Fatty Middle-Aged also became stiff, and a pair of small eyes suddenly burst out a touch of terrible lightning. On the fighting ring where Lin Sun was, a dreamy rain of silver arrows suddenly blossomed. It was as gorgeous as fireworks, as mysterious as starlight, and like condensed snow and frost, spreading a soul-stirring beauty in the void. That kind of beauty seemed to make the world pale and the soul fall in love with it. For a moment, young Ku and Fatty Middle-Aged both held their breath and were in a trance. What beautiful arrow light! What terrible power! With their eyesight, they could naturally see that all this came from the inconspicuous short crossbow in Lin Sun's hand. But they couldn't imagine what kind of short crossbow it was, and how could it release such dreamy beauty and terrible power. Ding! A strange wave sounded, awakening young Ku and Fatty Middle-Aged. They looked up and saw that the light curtain covering the fighting ring had disappeared, revealing Lin Sun's handsome figure. Under Lin Sun's feet was the body of the fire barbarian named Ba Fu. But his death was extremely horrible. His body was pierced with bowl-sized bloody holes. Especially on his face, there was a smooth and neat bloody hole, which made people's scalp tingle. Apart from that, More than 20 sharp arrows that glowed with a silver luster were forcefully inserted into different parts of the arena, releasing a cold light that caused one's heart to palpitate. This scene immediately shocked the obese middle-aged man, and he murmured, "From the beginning of the quarterly assessment, it has only been less than 5 seconds, right? 3 seconds. Young Ku's expression was strange as she softly spat out 2 words. For a moment, both of them were silent. Both of them knew what it meant to kill a strong fire barbarian comparable to Gang's spirit realm in 3 seconds. "Isn't that a miracle?" the obese middle-aged man said in a daze. Young Ku was silent. In the central temporary camp, Shu Sanchi looked at the light curtain, on which the scenes of major assessment areas were reflected. His eyes were fixed on the assessment areas of camps 7, 15, 22 and 31. To be more specific, his eyes had been wandering around by Lingshi, Zhao Yin, Zhang Sunheng, Li Duxing and other trainees. Occasionally, he would take a look at Camp 39 and the lad named Lin Sun, and his expression would change slightly at that moment. Until the beginning of the monthly assessment, Shu Sanchi suddenly turned his head to look at young man beside him. The latter seemed to be calm, but Shu Sanchi found in an instant that young man was not as calm as she looked. At least, young man's tightly clenched hands and slightly widened pupils showed that she was extremely nervous at this moment. Shu Sanchi couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Why did she do this? Ding! Suddenly, a ripple appeared on a light curtain. Shu Sanchi couldn't help but feel refreshed. Someone killed his opponent just at the beginning of the assessment? But when he saw clearly the first trainee who killed the barbarian soldier, Shu Sanchi's face instantly became strange. How was it really him? At this moment, young man was also stunned. She rubbed her eyes hard as if she couldn't believe it. Until she was sure that all this was true, she couldn't help giggling. Her eyebrows were dancing and she was in high spirits. She almost jumped up. "Chief Shu, I won." It was a simple sentence, but when young man said it, there was an extra strand of indescribable excitement and joy, and her starry eyes were extremely bright. Shu Sanchi was also a little shocked in his heart. He gently stroked the light curtain with his fingertip. Suddenly, the scene where Lin Sun killed the fire barbarian appeared in front of him again. In an instant, the arrow rain was just like the stars dancing in the sky and the silver frost shining on the mountains and rivers, which had an unparalleled magnificent and dreamy beauty. Even Shu Sanchi, who was as firm as a rock, couldn't help being in a trance at this moment. Young man showed a touch of infatuation. What a beautiful treasure! Soon, Shu Sanchi calmed down. After a moment of silence, he said, "This doesn't seem to be the standard crossbow in the camp." Young man nodded. "It's not, but it's definitely not old Mo helping him to cheat. He doesn't have such great ability to refine such a beautiful and terrible spiritual crossbow." As she said, young man told Shu Sanchi about Meteor's crossbow and Starfrost arrows one by one. Hearing this, Shu Sanchi tried hard to digest it for a long time and then said, "It seems that old Mo is right. This little guy's master should be an extremely great person." As he said, he couldn't help glancing at young man and said, "Since you already knew this, why didn't you tell me in advance?" Young man asked in reply, "If I had told you in advance, who would have bet with me?" Shu Sanchi was speechless and sighed with emotion in his heart. After so many years, young man's character still hadn't changed. Was it really good for her to make a desperate and unconventional move? At this time, young man asked, "Chief Shu, this is not cheating, is it?" Shu Sanchi shook his head. "There's no rule in the camp that trainees can't make their own spiritual weapons." Young man was completely relaxed at once. She raised her white chin and smiled triumphantly. "In just 3 seconds, he is the first one to kill a barbarian soldier. Among all the trainees in the camp, who can compete with my handsome little guy?" Shu Sanchi frowned. "Although this doesn't violate the rules of the camp, it's an unfair victory. From now on, similar things are not allowed to happen in the camp." Young man replied with an "oh" and smiled disapprovingly. Should I tell Lin that the miracle he created unintentionally forced Drillmaster Shu Sanchi to temporarily change the rules of the camp? This is an honor that ordinary people can't reach. Shu Sanchi glared at her and was about to say something when he heard a ding sound. A ripple appeared on the light screen again. Someone killed a barbarian soldier again. Shu Sanchi and young man looked at the source and found it was by Lingshi from Camp 7. 36 seconds. In the past, this result would be enough to show disdain for all the heroes. It's even better than your result back then, Chief Su. It's a pity that this little girl from the Bai family is in the same camp as my handsome little brother. She can only serve as a foil. Young man couldn't help but smile complacently. This is real combat effectiveness, Shu Sanchi said coldly. Without Meteor's crossbow, how could Lin Sun achieve this? Chief Shu, you're wrong. Why don't you say that if the Imperial Army didn't wear spiritual weapons, how could they be the opponents of those voodoo barbarian bastards? Young man frowned. Shu Sanchi was immediately displeased. What practitioners ultimately seek is the strength of themselves, not the external things. Blindly pursuing the strength of external things is tantamount to neglecting the essentials and seeking fish from a tree. Young man curled her lips. She knew that it was meaningless to refute. Ding, ding, ding. In the following time, the light screen began to ripple frequently, which meant that trainees successfully killed their opponents and passed the assessment. There were also some trainees who failed. They were rescued in time because they were in a life-and-death situation and were eliminated. Scenes of victory and failure were quickly played out in every combat area and every combat arena. Shu Sanchi stared at the light screen closely and watched some combat records from time to time. The existence of Bloodthirsty Camp was to dig out the most elite and powerful young overmatches for the Empire. As the chief instructor of Bloodthirsty Camp, Shu Sanchi must understand and study all the information of every trainee. Young man had calmed down a little. Holding her arms in front of her chest, she was thinking quickly about how to deal with those guys who had clamored with her in the bet and vent her anger. Before long, a drill master hurried over. He glanced at young man and said with a smile, "Young man, it seems that you are very unhappy now. What's the matter? Did you lose the bet? Don't be sad. Victory and defeat are common in soldiers." Young man snorted coldly, her expression calm like an ancient well. The drill master smiled and said to Shu Sanchi expectantly, "Chief Shu, is Bai Lingshi of our camp 7 the first?" Shu Sanchi looked at the drill master strangely and shook his head. "What?" The drill master's eyes widened as if he had been struck by lightning. He shouted, "Not the first with a record of 36 seconds? Then who is it? Zhao Yin? Zhang Sunheng? Or Li Duxing?" Shu Sanchi frowned and said, "Calm down. When the assessment is over, I will announce the result." The drill master's face changed and he remained silent. After a while, the drill master of Camp 22 rushed over with the same expectant look. He asked anxiously, "Chief Shu, is Zhao Yin of our Camp 22 the first this time?" Shu Sanchi shook his head to answer him. At that moment, the instructor was dumbfounded and stood there in a daze. Things like this kept happening in the following time. Young man felt itchy in her heart. She couldn't wait to reveal the answer immediately and give these guys a good blow. But she finally held back and even tightened her face. Not all the trainees were here yet. If she announced the answer at this time, the blow was obviously not good enough. Chapter 143. When dusk fell, the quarterly assessment also came to an end. A total of 600 trainees took part in the assessment, but only 237 of them successfully killed the fire barbarian and advanced to the next level. The other 363 trainees were completely eliminated. This was an absolutely shocking number. It must be known that the students who were able to persist until the end to participate in the quarterly exam were practically the elites of the elite. Whether it was aptitude, cultivation, or battle experience, they could all be considered the cream of the crop. But even so, more than half of the trainees were completely eliminated. It could be imagined how cruel and abnormal the result was. The elimination rate of Camp 39 was much smaller. A total of 13 trainees were eliminated, and the other 17 all passed the assessment. Most of the other camps had more than half of the trainees eliminated. In contrast, the performance of the trainees of Camp 39 was excellent. Their performance is much better than that of the previous trainees. At least it was not easy to keep 150 people in the quarterly assessment at that time. The fatty middle-aged sighed with emotion. Young Ku nodded. The performance of this session of trainees was really excellent. But when she thought of Lin's record, she couldn't help but be in a trance. Soon, young Ku was summoned away. Central Temporary Camp. With the end of the monthly assessment, the drill masters and some overmatches of all the 20 camps had already gathered here. They had long been aware of the results of the various camps. Logically speaking, being able to pass the monthly assessment with 237 trainees was definitely something worthy of celebration. The atmosphere was really lively at this time, but most of them were quarrels and uproars. Everything was about the first place of the monthly assessment. 3 seconds? How could Lin soon do that with his fighting capacity? He must have cheated. Yes, that's a strong fire barbarian comparable to the gang spirit realm. Let alone a little guy on the 8th level of martial realm, even a strong practitioner in the gang spirit realm couldn't win in 3 seconds. There must be something wrong. Chief Su, it's not that we're jealous of talent and have to target a little fellow. It's just that this achievement is truly too absurd. If he didn't cheat, how could a little fellow that was previously unknown be able to accomplish this? Voices of doubt and criticism rang out incessantly. The most excited one was the drill master of Camp 7. In his opinion, if Lin Sun didn't cheat, his trainee by Lingshire would definitely be the first in this monthly assessment. Young Ku frowned and didn't say anything. She just looked at young man in the distance with a complicated expression. As for young man, she had been standing beside Shu Sanchi. She had a graceful and slender figure. She crossed her arms in front of her plump chest and looked at the people around with a smile. It seemed that she didn't notice the atmosphere in the field that was constantly fermenting and full of gunpowder. She liked this feeling. Looking at the flustered and exasperated expressions on the faces of those fellows, and seeing their angry and unwilling expressions, young man felt more and more pleased. Just yesterday, they were clamoring to see him make a fool of himself. It was time for him to see them make a fool of themselves. Chief Su, please say something. Someone spoke in a deep voice, suppressing the various voices in the surroundings and causing everyone to look at Shu Sanchi in unison. Since the final result was announced, Shu Sanchi had been silent, as if he was thinking about something. He didn't pay attention to the farce in the field. Until now, Shu Sanchi seemed to wake up from a dream. His eyes regained their former sharpness and glanced over the whole field like a cold blade. The atmosphere in the field became dead silent in an instant. Shu Sanchi got up and didn't talk nonsense. With a light stroke of his fingertip, a light curtain appeared. The scene of Lin killing barbarian Bafu was immediately shown on the light curtain. It was so detailed that everyone present could see it clearly. The handsome teenager standing alone, the dreamy silver arrow rain, and the bloody holes all over Bafu's body when he died were interwoven into a beautiful, bloody and soul-stirring picture. Suddenly, many people present held their breath, their pupils dilated, and a trace of shock arose in their hearts. Even young Ku, young man, fatty middle-aged and others who had already seen this scene couldn't keep calm when they saw it again. This was Meteor's crossbow, an unprecedented new spiritual short crossbow. It was a terrible killing weapon with unimaginable power. You've seen it. The truth can't be falsified, Shu Sanchi said coldly. Everyone seemed to wake up from a dream. Someone couldn't help shouting, Chief Shu, it's true. But that short crossbow is not an imperial spiritual weapon at all. You can't find one in the whole bloodthirsty camp. How could Lin have it? Yes, if you have such a great killing weapon, I'm afraid anyone can do it. It's no different from cheating. The others also chimed in. Have you ever seen this kind of short crossbow before? Shu Sanchi seemed to have expected this scene and asked unhurriedly. Everyone was stunned and shook their heads. Indeed, they had never seen such a magnificent short crossbow like the flowing starlight. This is Lin's self-made short crossbow, which was finally completed by old Mo. There is no rule in the camp that self-made weapons are not allowed in the monthly assessment, Shu Sanchi said calmly. Self-made short crossbow? Hearing this sentence, many people present were really shocked. What did it mean? It meant that Lin might be a spiritual tattooist with incredible means. However, when they heard that the short crossbow was finally completed by old Mo, many people realized that this unprecedented short crossbow also had an inseparable relationship with old Mo Chief Shu. Old Mo is a spiritual tattooist. That boy made such a thing with the help of old Mo. It's obvious that he cheated, someone shouted unwillingly. If the trainees in your camp can design and conceive such a powerful short crossbow, I won't refuse to do something for them, let alone ask old Mo for help. Shu Sanchi frowned, implying that if you can do it, you can do it. At this point, everyone present could only shut up. Even if they were reluctant, they knew that no one could take away Lin's first place in the monthly assessment. Seeing this, young man also smiled. She was ready to settle the score. She cleared her throat and said, "Guys, do you still remember the bet yesterday?" In an instant, many people present had a strange look on their faces, feeling quite embarrassed and embarrassed. A ridiculous bet was really won by young man. It was simply unreasonable. The first place in the quarterly assessment, Lin with a combat time of 3 seconds. The second place, by Lingshi with a combat time of 36 seconds. The third place, Zhao Yin with a combat time of 41 seconds. The fourth place, Li Duxing with a combat time of 44 seconds. The fifth place, Zhang Sun Heng with a combat time of 45 seconds. When the results and rankings of this quarterly assessment were announced, it instantly set off a great disturbance in the entire bloodthirsty camp like a storm. Numerous uproars broke out in every camp like boiling water. Lin? Who the bastard is Lin? How could he kill his opponent in 3 seconds? He must be cheating. Yes, he must be cheating. Look at his result. He is 33 seconds ahead of Bai Lingshi. Is he stronger than Bai Lingshi? Damn it, I'm going to Camp 39 to see what kind of person Lin is and how he got the first place. If he can't give a satisfactory answer, this thing is bound to be over. Such doubts and curses took place in almost every camp. Lin, the first place, not only didn't get any applause and praise, but also became the object of criticism, which was probably beyond young man's imagination. Even in Camp 39, when they heard the result of the assessment, they almost went crazy at once. Did Lin really get the first place? It was so ridiculous. It was even more ridiculous than yesterday's bet. Some people even couldn't help questioning loudly. Lin was there at that time, looking at the strange eyes cast on him and listening to all kinds of doubts and angry discussions. Lin sneered in his heart. These guys seemed to be filled with righteous indignation, but in fact they were all jealous and unwilling. What was more, even Drillmaster Young Ku didn't say anything, which was undoubtedly an affirmation of his assessment result. But they just accused him of cheating. Were they really as blind as a bat? But Lin soon didn't bother to pay attention to this. Of course, he knew that he had made too much noise this time. Even Bai Lingshi and Zhao Yin were suppressed by him. Anyone in his position would be unwilling to accept it. But Lin didn't regret doing so. Whether it was to help young man win the bet or not, he would do it. Unwilling to accept it? Well, you guys can also refine a meteor's crossbow. This was Lin Sun's idea. Although it was a little arrogant, he was indeed a little unhappy in his heart. It was not easy for him to get the first place, but he was reduced to the target of public condemnation. Anyone in his position would inevitably feel depressed. With a bang, Lin's shoulder was punched hard, and then he saw Ning Meng shout excitedly, "Damn it, you are amazing!" Lin grimaced and said, "Don't you worry that I will lose your face by cheating?" Ning Meng said disdainfully, "What do you mean by cheating? Those guys are just jealous. If you are so awesome, why don't they also cheat?" Even the drill masters in the camp didn't say anything, but they kept clamoring. "It's really annoying." Lin laughed. He suddenly found that although Ning Meng seemed to be careless, the simpler a person was, the better he could see through the essence of things at once. A scholar who has been away for 3 days should be treated with new eyes. I didn't believe this sentence before, but now I finally believe it after seeing you. At this time, Sure you also came over with a smile, looking at Lin with a slightly different look. "Is this flattery or undeserved praise?" Lin asked. Ning Meng sneered first. "In my opinion, this is neither flattery nor undeserved praise, but flattery by the toy boy." Sure Yu's look became dull, and his look at Ning Meng became unkind. Lin shut up decisively and kept a distance from them without a trace. He knew that these two guys were going to quarrel again. As expected, the next moment, they began to quarrel with each other. This monthly assessment came to an end in all kinds of discussions and doubts. Anyway, the name of Lin almost spread to every corner of the bloodthirsty camp overnight and was known by all drill masters and trainees. But at the same time, all kinds of doubts and denunciations against Lin also followed. The controversy continued, making Lin a topic of both praise and blame. Chapter 144. At the end of the quarterly assessment, more than half of the original 600 trainees were directly eliminated, leaving only 237 trainees. In the end, the 12 camps that lost the most trainees were directly eliminated, and the trainees in these camps were also incorporated into the other 8 camps. Among the 8 camps, except for Camp 39 which had 27 trainees, the other 7 camps all maintained the standard of 30 trainees. This also meant that some familiar faces left Lin Sun, but some strange faces appeared. For example, Shin Wenbin had been completely eliminated in the last monthly assessment, and Wen Mingxiu was unfortunately eliminated in this quarterly assessment. In short, among the first batch of senior trainees who entered Camp 39, there were only 8 or 9 people left, including Lin Sun, Sure Yu, Ning Meng, Qi Kan, Li Qiu, and Mao Lingshan. The others, such as Gong Ming, Lei Xinyue, Di Jun, and Yi Qi, came from the original Camp 40. Besides them, there were some other new trainees who had just been incorporated into Camp 39 after the quarterly assessment. Those who could stay in the quarterly assessment were certainly not weak. Among these new trainees, there was only one person who attracted the most attention of Camp 39, Li Duxing. He was a young overmatch who had been famous as early as the beginning of training in Bloodthirsty Camp. He could even compete with Bai Lingshi, Zhao Yin, and Zhang Sun Heng. Just like his name, Li Duxing was extremely low-key. He was a loner, had no friends, and was eccentric and reticent, but his fighting capacity was undoubtedly extremely strong. Many people guessed the origin of Li Duxing. Some said that he came from the Li family of Yuntong, one of the 7 aristocratic families in the Forbidden City of the Empire. Others said that he came from the Icy Mist City, which was known as the Snow City in the northern border of the Empire, and was a descendant of the Li family of Snow Mountain. Some even said that Li Duxing's origin was even more mysterious. He came from an ancient country that was millions of miles away from Xiao Empire. But no matter what the rumor was, there was no doubt that Li Duxing's fighting capacity was powerful. Such a mysterious and low-key young overmatch was suddenly incorporated into Camp 39, which naturally aroused the vigilance of many trainees in Camp 39. Sure Yu, Ning Meng, Qi Kan, Gong Ming, Lei Xinyue, and Di Jun all felt a little pressure because of the arrival of Li Duxing. One more top powerhouse meant that their ranking in Camp 39 would be threatened. As for Lin, the arrival of Li Duxing actually helped him attract a lot of attention, which made him, who had been controversial because of the title of first place in the quarterly assessment, feel much more relaxed. At the end of the quarterly assessment, in old Mo's warehouse, Lin Sun lay comfortably on the chair. No one would disturb him here. At least he didn't have to pay attention to the doubts and accusations of the outside world. Closing his eyes, Lin Sun silently deduced the mystery of the nature insight and spirit devour scripture in his mind. This method of cultivating spiritual power could indeed be described as marvelous and overbearing. The so-called miraculous referred to the fact that this cultivation method was different from other cultivation methods. It was not a cultivation method that focused on the inside and the outside, but a unique cultivation method that took into account both the inside and the outside. The most profound thing was that according to the records of this technique, the body of a cultivator was like a furnace. Internally, it could smelt the source and temper the Tao foundation. Externally, it could swallow the spirits of the world and use the body to carry the Tao. To put it simply, the most unique feature of this cultivation method was that it took into account two different cultivation methods of tempering the body and cultivating spiritual power. Body refining started from the outside to the inside. Qi refining started from the inside to the outside. Body refinement and Qi refinement were two different methods of cultivation, but they could complement each other. Many cultivators in the world cultivated both body refinement and Qi refinement. But the nature insight and spirit devour scripture could refine both body and Qi at the same time. This point alone was marvelous and unimaginable. The reason why it was overbearing was that it had extremely harsh requirements for practitioners. Practitioners should not only have a strong body, but also a solid foundation far beyond ordinary people's, because only in this way could they bear the power of running and cultivating this method. Otherwise, there would be the danger of exploding and dying. This requirement alone was enough to make many practitioners flinch. But for Lin Sun, it was not a problem at all. He even felt that this method was tailor-made for him. In terms of physical strength, he could compete with the overmatches on the 8th level of martial realm. In terms of spiritual power cultivation, he was even better than the overmatches on the 9th level of martial realm. Mill Waterfall's current. No wonder this test has a great effect on refining the body. It turns out that everything is to prepare for practicing the nature insight and spirit devour scripture. If I can't pass this test, it means that my physical strength is not suitable for practicing this method at all. Lin Sun suddenly realized that the reason why the Mill Waterfall's current was set in the heaven accessing place was to prepare for practicing the nature insight and spirit devour scripture. If I couldn't pass this test, it meant that I was not qualified to practice this method. Lin Sun had secretly decided that from today on, he would replace the original Spirit Concentrating Manual and choose to practice the Nature Insight and Spirit Devour Scripture. Spirit Concentrating Manual was particular about purity and tranquility, and its style was moderate and mellow. Lin Sun was weak in those days, so he could only practice this gentle method. But now he was different from before, so it was a little unsatisfactory for him to practice this method again. "Hi guys, I'm back." Suddenly, a coquettish and soft laughter sounded. Young man's graceful and slender figure rushed into the warehouse. At this moment, she was in high spirits, her beautiful and sexy face was dazzling, and a smile blossomed on her plump, red lips. She was indescribably beautiful and bright. "Come on, handsome boy, kiss me." Young man rushed to Lin Sun. Before Lin Sun could react, a pair of soft and smooth white hands cupped his face, and young man's fiery red lips kissed his face hard. Lin Sun was stunned. Was he kissed by force? Before he could react, young man had let go of her hand. Staring at Lin Sun with her watery eyes, she giggled and said, "You did a good job this time. I'm very happy. This is my reward for you." "Sister, I also want a reward." At some point, old Mo also scurried over. He opened his arms and looked at young man lecherously with a drooling face. "Get out of here. I want to vomit when I see your old face." Young man snorted and kicked old Mo away, making him scream. "It's so unfair." Old Mo looked resentful. Lin Sun came to his sense from the daze and said in surprise, "Sister, you look so happy. Did you win a lot of things from this bet?" Young man snapped her fingers and said proudly, "Smart. I not only won my face, but also earned 49,000 points." Before Lin Sun said anything, old Mo screamed, "So many? So you can leave the bloodthirsty camp soon?" Young man nodded, and then she seemed to think of something. She looked gloomy and said, "But I won't leave for the time being." She seemed to be a little dispirited, no longer in high spirits. Without saying a few words, she left in a hurry. "Old Mo, what's the relationship between points and leaving?" Lin Sun couldn't help asking. Old Mo thought for a while and said vaguely, "You only need to know that as long as you earn enough points, the drill masters in the camp can regain their freedom and don't have to bear the responsibilities and obligations of the empire." Lin Sun said, "Oh," but he knew clearly that it was not as simple as what old Mo said. To Lin Sun's surprise, young Ku also appeared in the warehouse not long after young man left. It was late at night. What did young Ku come here for? In the past, young Ku would never step into this place unless it was necessary. The reason was that she didn't want to meet young man. "At noon tomorrow, the bloodthirsty camp will give you top 10 trainees in the quarterly assessment a reward. Drillmaster Shu will take you to a place in person." Young Ku stated her purpose directly without any nonsense, but there was a trace of strangeness in her eyes when she looked at Lin Sun. Lin Sun nodded, but he was thinking what reward he could get for the first place this time. "Old Mo, come with me. Chief Shu wants to see you," young Ku said to old Mo. "What for?" Old Mo was confused and didn't know what was going on. "Just come with me." Young Ku didn't explain anymore. Before leaving, she suddenly came to Lin Sun and looked at him with her clear eyes. "Don't you feel disgusted?" Lin Sun was stunned. "Drillmaster, what's wrong with me?" Young Ku turned around and left without explaining anything. Only old Mo seemed to see something. He walked to Lin Sun with a wretched face and sneered, "It's really disgusting." Then he also walked away, leaving Lin Sun alone with a blank face. Disgusting? What did it mean? He inadvertently glanced at a smooth metal pillar beside him. When he saw his own image reflected on the surface of the pillar, he immediately understood and smiled bitterly. It turned out that young man's kiss just now had left a striking red mark on his cheek. Is it an undeserved disaster? Lin Sun wiped off the lip mark and sat back in the chair helplessly. He was wondering why Shu summoned old Mo in the middle of the night. Did it have something to do with Meteor's crossbow? Lin Sun was lost in thought. From the moment he decided to help old Mo transform the spiritual furnace of Ziying battleship, Lin Sun knew that his knowledge of spiritual tattoos would inevitably attract others' attention. But this was exactly what Lin Sun wanted. He wanted to prove his value. In this way, he might be able to get more benefits from the bloodthirsty camp. In fact, Lin Sun did get a lot of benefits these days. He could enjoy a steady supply of condensate pills every day and young man's personal guidance. Even for a period of time, young Ku even trained with him alone. Lin Sun was the only one in the entire bloodthirsty camp who could enjoy such special treatment. But at the same time, Lin Sun was also worried that if he exposed too much, it would cause some unnecessary trouble. Just like at this moment, he was not sure what Shu Sanchi wanted to do by summoning old Mo and whether it would affect his situation. Chapter 145. The atmosphere in the hall made of granite was solemn. It was late at night, but Shu Sanchi, fatty middle-aged, young man and 2 other drill masters gathered together, waiting for something. When young Ku arrived with old Mo, Shu Sanchi asked directly, "Old Mo, how is the improvement of Ziying battleship?" Old Mo glanced at the people present and hesitated. Shu Sanchi said, "There are no outsiders here. You can speak frankly." Old Mo thought for a while and said, In fact, the improvement has been completed a few days ago. After replacing the spiritual furnace with a new one, the comprehensive power of Ziying battleship has been more than twice as strong as before. When it came to what he was good at, Old Mo's thin face showed a disdainful look. It is certain that after this improvement, the speed of Ziying battleship will be twice as fast as before. It can completely avoid the pursuit of Sea Spirit Realm strongmen. At the same time, if the 6 spiritual cannons on Ziying battleship are fully fired, they can threaten the lives of Sea Spirit Realm strongmen. Hearing this, everyone present was shocked and their eyes lit up. In the past, the power of Ziying battleship could not threaten the strongmen of Sea Spirit Realm. This power alone was enough to prove how powerful the improved Ziying battleship was. The rarest thing is that this battleship can be operated perfectly by the practitioners of Gang Spirit Realm. All of you have participated in the war between the Empire and the Voodoo Barbarians. You should know what it means. Old Mo's eyes were shining. Everyone was shocked again, and many people could not keep calm. Of course, they knew what it meant. It meant that as long as such a Ziying battleship was equipped, a practitioner of Gang Spirit Realm was very likely to kill a strongman of Sea Spirit Realm. In the war, it could even kill the strongman of the Voodoo Barbarian tribe who was comparable to the strongman of Sea Spirit Realm. Awesome! A drill master exclaimed. His name was Dong Lu. He was as tall as an iron tower. Every inch of his muscles was as hard as rocks. Standing there, he gave people a very strong sense of oppression. How about the consumption of spiritual crystals of the improved Ziying battleship? Young Ku suddenly asked. Her words went straight to the point, which made many people nod secretly. Ziying battleship was powerful, but the source of power came from spiritual crystals. If the consumption was too much, it would not be worth the loss. Elder Mo chuckled and said proudly, "Don't worry. The consumption of spiritual crystals will only be less than before, not more." At this moment, even Shu Sanqi was slightly unable to sit still. He exchanged glances with the others in the surroundings, and all of them could see the excitement and shock in each other's eyes. "Is the refining cost of this Ziying battleship high?" Shu Sanqi asked. "It's the same as before, but the process is a little troublesome. In the past, it took about half a month to refine a Ziying battleship. Now it takes about 1 month. Old Mo thought for a while and said, however, if they are refined by a group of spiritual tattooists in the Academy of Spiritual Implements of the Empire, it should not be a big problem to produce a large number of them. At this point, everyone understood the uniqueness and extraordinariness of this brand new Ziying battleship, and they couldn't help feeling excited. From today onwards, the Empire will have a new weapon of war. The obese middle-aged man took a deep breath and said in a deep voice. The others nodded, and someone suggested that Old Mo should be rewarded. Old Mo suddenly said, "It's all thanks to Lin. Lin Sun." At the mention of this name, people couldn't help but think of the terrible power of the Meteor's crossbow in today's quarterly assessment. Combined with the power of the improved Ziying battleship, Shu Sanqi and others were in a trance. How could a 13-year-old boy have such amazing attainments in spiritual tattoos? What kind of reclusive master was his master? As for Lin's reward, Old Mo, you can ask him what he wants. As long as we can satisfy him, we can promise him. Shu Sanqi thought for a moment and said decisively, however, from today onwards, no one can disclose this matter. Whether it's the Ziying battleship or the Meteor's crossbow, no one can know that it's designed and conceived by Lin. Everyone was in a daze, and then they understood that Shu Sanqi was protecting Lin in another way. Of course, if anyone dares to do this, I will be the first one who won't spare him. Young man's starry eyes were shining, but her expression was rarely solemn. Chief Shu, since the boy has such a high attainment in spiritual tattoos, I'd like to know if he can completely repair your wolf fang, the armor with spiritual tattoos. Suddenly, the extremely burly and majestic Dong Lu spoke in a deep voice, which immediately attracted the attention of all the people present. Shu Sanchi thought of something, but he finally shook his head and stopped talking about this topic. Instead, he took out a blank document like jade and handed it to young Ku. Lin had passed the county test of the Empire before he arrived at the bloodthirsty camp. The state test of the Empire ended a few days ago. Although Lin didn't have the opportunity to participate in it, I have entrusted someone to help him pass the state test of Green Maple County. This is the admission certificate. You can give it to him. Young Ku was stunned. Chief Shu, you want him to have the opportunity to continue to participate in the province test of the Empire after he leaves the bloodthirsty camp? Others also had some doubts. A talent like Lin didn't need to participate in the various examinations of the Empire at all, and he could be competent for more important positions. Shu Sanchi's action was undoubtedly a waste of talent. Shu Sanchi was silent for a moment and said, "Someone has already arranged for Lin. It's out of our control." Young Ku couldn't help asking, "Is it Heiyao Shrine?" Everyone felt a chill in their hearts and narrowed their eyes. It seemed that they all knew very well what a horrible existence Heiyao Shrine was. Shu Sanchi didn't answer but said calmly, "Our duty is to train war talents for the Empire. As for other things, we can't worry about them." Everyone was silent for a moment. "You get ready. 1 month later, you will lead the trainees to the northern frontier of the Empire. This time, the training theater that the Empire has divided for the trainees of the bloodthirsty camp is located in the Demon Cloud Ridge in the northern frontier," Shu Sanchi said in a low voice. In Old Mo's warehouse, Lin received the certificate of passing the state test of Green Maple County, on which it was written, name, Lin Sun birthplace, Feiyun Village, Donglin Town, Green Maple County, Southwest Province of the Empire. Age, 14 cultivation, 8th level of martial realm talent attribute. None occupation, spiritual tattoo apprentice assessment result. Above. Examiner's comment. Diligent, studious, upright, recommended to participate in the province test of the Empire. With just a glance, Lin Sun smiled. This certificate of state test must be real, because it was branded with the official seal of the Xiao flower of the Empire, so it couldn't be forged. But Lin Sun knew that this certificate must be obtained by the bloodthirsty camp through special connections. Lin Sun couldn't help sighing with emotion. A state test of the Empire was so important that it attracted countless practitioners to participate in it, eager to make a great leap and have a meteoric rise. But who could imagine that as long as one had special connections, one could get such a certificate without participating in the state test? This made Lin Sun more aware that as long as one had the power and power above the rules, the so-called rules were just decorations. "Boy, do you have any complaints about the Ziying battleship and Meteor's crossbow?" Old Mo asked beside him. "Of course I do," Lin Sun said with a smile. "It's my creativity, but all the credit is given to you, which makes me disappointed." Old Mo said awkwardly, "In fact, they did this to protect you. If you don't want to, I'll go and argue with them." Lin Sun hurriedly said, "No, I'm kidding. Don't take it seriously." Old Mo still felt uneasy, but he didn't want to rob Lin's credit at all. He said, "Shu Sanchi said that if you have any request, just tell him. As long as he can do it, he won't refuse." This was the answer Lin Sun wanted most. After thinking for a while, he said, "Old Mo, tell Drill Master Shu Sanchi that I don't need anything. I just want to ask him for a favor." Old Mo was stunned. "A favor?" Lin Sun said seriously, "Yes, a favor." He didn't explain more, but Old Mo seemed to understand something vaguely. He looked at Lin Sun with slight appreciation and said, "Treasures have a price, but favors are priceless. You are very smart to see through this." Lin Sun smiled without saying anything. When hearing Lin Sun's request, Shu Sanchi frowned slightly and fell into thought. After a long time, he said coldly, "Tell the boy that favors can be big or small. I only repay favors within my ability, and I won't do anything against my will." When Lin Sun heard this answer, he immediately smiled. As long as old Mo agreed, everything would be fine. What on earth are you doing this for? Old Mo couldn't help asking. I just want to prepare a way out for myself. Even I'm not sure whether I can use this favor in the future. Lin Sun lay in the chair with deep eyes, a little absent-minded. He thought of Xia Ji, Master Lu whose life and death were unknown, and his purpose of coming to Xiao Empire. Looking at Lin Sun, old Mo suddenly found that this 14-year-old boy seemed to hide many secrets and thoughts that he couldn't know. The next morning, Lin Sun returned to Camp 39. The quarterly assessment was over, and the training life in the camp returned to the boring, cruel, and abnormal life. But when the training in the morning was over, a group of people suddenly rushed into Camp 39 in a threatening manner, claiming that they wanted to compare notes with Lin and see what the trainee who ranked first in the quarterly assessment was capable of. This group of people came from different camps, and there were about a dozen of them. Obviously, they were not satisfied with the fact that Lin Sun won the first place in the quarterly assessment yesterday. For a moment, the whole Camp 39 was bustling. Even many trainees in the same camp planned to watch the fun and see whether Lin Sun dared to accept the challenge. For such a request, Lin Sun refused flatly without any hesitation. What a joke! Was this a fight? Obviously, they came to pick a quarrel. Chapter 146. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, facing the challenge from the trainees of other camps, no one expected that Lin Sun would refuse it without hesitation. Wasn't it too decisive? Everyone was in a daze. What? Are you afraid? Or do you think that you don't deserve the title of the first place in the quarterly assessment? Someone sneered disdainfully. I didn't expect that you, Lin Sun, were so extraordinary. Who would have thought that you didn't even dare to fight with me? It's really disappointing. Lin Sun, if you dare not accept the challenge, admit in front of everyone that you are not as good as Lin Sun and are not qualified to be the first place in the quarterly assessment. Those trainees of other camps who came to challenge all shouted and used all kinds of means to ridicule Lin Sun. Even some trainees of Camp 39 couldn't bear such harsh words. But when they looked at Lin Sun again, he was calm and unaffected, which made many people speechless. Wasn't this guy angry at all under such provocation and criticism? But no matter what others thought, no matter how the trainees of other camps clamored, Lin Sun seemed to have made up his mind not to accept the challenge. Such an attitude of avoiding the challenge was regarded as a kind of retreat in the eyes of others, which made those clamoring people more unscrupulous. At last, even Ning Meng couldn't bear it anymore. He frowned and asked Lin Sun, "Can you bear it?" Lin Sun was in a daze. According to the rules of the camp, there is no rule that I must accept other people's requests to learn from each other, right? Ning Meng was stunned. But don't you think it's shameful? Lin Sun sighed. How can I have time to play with them? There is no benefit in learning from each other. Nobody will agree to this kind of thing. Ning Meng was stunned. Don't you have any sense of shame? Self-esteem? Lin Sun laughed. What do you think? Ning Meng said angrily. How can I know what you are thinking? Lin Sun put his hands behind his back and said slowly, Then don't worry about it. Let them make as much noise as possible. Ning Meng was keenly aware that Lin Sun seemed to be planning something again. He couldn't help but say, Well, it's up to you. Anyway, it's not me who is ashamed. On the other side, Sure Yu looked at everything with a smile and whispered to Li Qiu beside him, Have you ever seen Lin Sun suffer losses? Li Qiu was stunned. I don't think so. Being provoked by a group of trainees from other camps, Lin Sun chose to retreat from the beginning to the end, which made Li Qiu feel a little aggrieved. He felt that Lin Sun was too spineless, not like an unyielding young overmatch at all. But after listening to Sure Yu's words, he suddenly realized that according to Sure Yu's style in the past, Sure Yu seemed to be a man who had never suffered losses. With this idea, when Li Qiu looked at Lin Sun in the distance again, his eyes became slightly different. Did this guy have any bad ideas? In the distance, Gong Ming, Lei Xinyue, Yi Qi, and the others were also watching this scene with different expressions, but they didn't say anything. However, Qi Kan and Mao Lingshan frowned at Lin's behavior. This guy's performance was too shameful for Camp 39. Many trainees of Camp 39 had the same idea as Qi Kan and Lin Sun. They all felt displeased and humiliated by Lin's behavior. Li Duxing was the only one who turned around and left after watching silently for a while, as if the excitement couldn't arouse his interest and attention at all. It was lunchtime, and Drill Master Young Ku was not in the camp, so the excitement didn't dissipate soon. On the contrary, as time went by, more and more trainees heard the news and came to watch the fun. Soon the front of Camp 39 was crowded. When they saw Lin Sun didn't dare to accept the challenge, most of them showed ridicule and disdain on their faces. Was this the first in the monthly assessment? It was so shameful. Yes, most people still couldn't accept that Lin Sun had become the first in the quarterly assessment. They were very skeptical about the ranking. A guy who was not well known in the past had actually become the first in the quarterly assessment, suppressing the likes of Bai Lingshi and Zhao Yin. This was too unreasonable. So many people agreed that Lin Sun must have cheated. With this kind of doubt, when they saw Lin Sun didn't even dare to accept the challenge, they increasingly doubted that Lin Sun was unworthy of his reputation. It was inevitable to criticize Lin Sun. Lin Sun, let me ask you one last time. Do you dare to accept the challenge? A strong teenager with a black mole under his chin shouted with disdain. This teenager was Wang Wenyuan from Camp 7. Among those present, he was the most arrogant one. At this moment, Lin Sun finally opened his mouth and said with a smile, "Yes, why not? But if there is no prize in the competition, isn't it a waste of effort?" Wang Wenyuan was stunned. "What prize?" Lin Sun said casually, "If you can take out 1,000 condensate pills as the bet, how about I fight with you right now? 1,000 condensate pills." This was equivalent to the value of 20,000 imperial silver coins, which was absolutely a huge fortune beyond imagination. Even in the bloodthirsty camp, it would cost 3,000 points to exchange for 1,000 condensate pills. Are you fucking unwilling to fight with me on purpose? The prize is so big. Who can afford it? Wang Wenyuan was furious. Others also frowned. Originally, they thought that Lin Sun would finally accept the challenge, but they never thought that he would make such an outrageous request. What was the difference between this and refusing to accept the challenge? What was the concept of 3,000 points? Li Duxing, who had the highest score in Camp 39 now, only had 1,800 points. All of a sudden, many people present thought that Lin Sun's action was a pretense that he didn't want to fight on purpose, and their views on Lin Sun became more and more contemptuous. "Do you dare to accept the challenge?" Lin Sun smiled calmly. "It's not a matter of whether I dare or not. Even if I use up all my points, I can't exchange for 1,000 condensate pills." Wang Wenyuan was furious. "You are obviously cheating." Lin Sun looked at him as if he was an idiot. "If you can't do it alone, you can borrow from others. As long as you get 1,000 condensate pills, I will fight with you at any time." "Brother Wang, since this guy said so, I will get 100 condensate pills for you." Someone stood out with a sneer. "I will pay 50. I will pay 80. Many people present couldn't bear Lin Sun's face, and stood out to cheer for Wang Wenyuan. They thought that this guy dared not accept the challenge at all and made such an excessive request, which was shameless to the extreme. In just a moment, Wang Wenyuan had collected 1,000 condensate pills, which showed how much these people hated Lin Sun. "Lin Sun, the stakes are enough. What else do you want to say?" Many people shouted with a sneer on their faces. Shi Yu, Ning Meng, Li Qiu and others all looked strange. Seeing this scene, how could they not understand what Lin Sun was going to do? Lin Sun was going to take the opportunity to plunder these guys. Kan, Mao Lengshan and other trainees of Camp 39 didn't have such awareness. Even if they faintly saw something, they didn't think that all this was what Lin Sun wanted. I'd like to see whether he dares to refuse this challenge in such a situation. Kan chuckled. In this case, if I refuse again, it will be too unreasonable. Lin Sun glanced around and said to Wang Wenyuan with a smile, "Are you sure you want to fight with me?" Of course. Before Wang Wenyuan finished his words, he was interrupted by a person. "Wenyuan, let me do it." As he said, a thin teenager came out. His long hair was covered with a layer of gray, and his eyes were as sharp as an eagle's. As soon as he appeared, he attracted many people's attention. "It's Shirao Kun of Camp 7. I heard that he ranks in the top 3 in Camp 7, only a little worse than by Lingshi and Yin Rufeng. He is also a tough guy. Shirao Kun comes from the ancient house of Shao and is one of the most outstanding people of this generation. Look at his gray hair. Obviously, he has practiced the unique ancestral skill of House Shao, wind-roaring killing fist, to a certain degree. Shirao Kun is really powerful. I heard that if he was assigned to some other camps, he could easily rank first. Yes, there are too many masters in Camp 7. Bai Lingshi is a mountain that no one can surpass." The crowd was talking about it. Seeing Shirao Kun come out, they were all excited. Ning Meng, Shi Yu and others couldn't help frowning. They had never expected this change. They had also heard of Xiao Kun. His strength was undoubtedly strong, and he was not inferior to them. If Lin Sun fought with him, it was hard to say who would win. Lin Sun narrowed his eyes and looked at Shirao Kun who came out. He suddenly said, "If you want to fight with me, you can give me 1,000 more condensate pills." Wow! The crowd almost couldn't believe their ears. Was Lin Sun afraid? He even made a more outrageous request. Despicable! Wang Wenyuan shouted angrily. Lin Sun said unhappily, "You have changed your opponent before the fight. I just made a request. Do you think it's despicable?" Wang Wenyuan still wanted to say something, but he was interrupted by Shirao Kun. Then Shirao Kun looked at Lin Sun with his eagle-like eyes and said, "Okay, I agree to your request." Lin Sun smiled and said, "Great." Shirao Kun said indifferently, "I hope that when you lose, you will take the initiative to give up the first place of the quarterly assessment and admit that you don't deserve this honor." His words made the atmosphere in the field suddenly tense and filled with a sense of killing, which made many people secretly feel happy. They all couldn't wait for Shirao Kun to give Lin Sun a heavy lesson. Lin Sun just nodded slightly to this. At this moment, the warm smile on his handsome face disappeared, and the angular outline of his face was calm. In his body, the surging and vast spiritual power ran slowly, like a dragon sleeping under the abyss waking up. Chapter 147. A large area was vacated in the center of the camp for Lin and Shirao, who stood opposite each other. The trainees of Camp 39 and other camps all fixed their eyes on the two in the field at this moment. The atmosphere became tense in an instant. Many people were full of confidence in Shirao, who was at the peak of the 9th level of Martial Realm and had the opportunity to reach the Gang Spirit Realm a few years ago. Besides, he came from the ancient Shirao family and mastered the unique skills passed down from generation to generation. On the other hand, if Lin hadn't won the first place in the quarterly assessment, most people wouldn't have known his existence. Especially when they learned that Lin Sun was only at the 8th level of Martial Realm and didn't seem to have a prominent family background, many people concluded that Lin Sun must have cheated to get the first place in the quarterly assessment. At this moment, the duel between Shirao and Lin might be the time to verify all the truth. Whining in the field, Shirao stood proudly, and a terrible spiritual storm suddenly blew up all over his body, making his gray hair fly in the air. A trace of disdain and arrogance emerged in his hawk-like sharp eyes. For a moment, many people's faces changed slightly. What a strong momentum! Even Shi Yu, Ning Meng and others couldn't help but show a trace of seriousness. A person's reputation was like a tree's shadow. Only by this momentum, it was enough to prove that Shurao deserved his reputation. In terms of realm, I'm inferior to you. For fairness' sake, I'll let you strike first, Shurao said indifferently, with his eyes like lightning and his momentum soaring. Then I'll do as you say. Lin smiled slightly and stamped on the ground with the tip of his foot. He rushed to Shurao like an arrow leaving the bow. Boom! Lin soon clenched his hand into a fist and punched out simply. His punch pierced through the air and set off a terrible torrent of spiritual energy, rushing like thunder. The moment an expert made a move, one would be able to tell whether one was an expert or not. This punch faintly revealed a kind of vast and boundless spirit that could swallow a great abyss and advance forward bravely. Gee, it seems to be the fierce tiger out of the mountain in marching boxing. Judging from the momentum of his punching, he has reached the consummation of the martial realm and condensed his own fist momentum. Someone was amazed. Humph, the marching fist is only a basic fist technique, but this guy dares to use it against Xiao Kun. Isn't he too arrogant? Someone said disdainfully. You do have some skill, but this fist technique is not enough. In the field, Xiao Kun spoke indifferently. He suddenly spun his arm, clenched his fingers into a fist, and fiercely struck out like a drill. Woo woo woo, a storm of spiritual energy suddenly appeared on his diamond-like fist, tearing the air apart and emitting ear-piercing wails. Howling wind, killing fist, killing storm. Many people revealed a wisp of shock. This was the ultimate technique passed down by the Shao clan's ancestors, a unique and terrifying fist technique. The winds created by the fist whistled through the air, and it destroyed the world. This windstorm annihilation was simply like a windstorm that gathered into a single fist. The terrifying might it displayed was unimaginably tyrannical. Rumble, the two men's fists collided head-on, producing a deafening explosion and a strong gust of wind that blew away all the sand and stones within a radius of more than 100 feet. Thump, thump, thump. Lin soon retreated 3 steps and narrowed his eyes. This guy was really not simple. Under the attack of this fist, Lin Sun was careless for a moment and suffered a lot of hidden losses. If you only have this little strength, admit defeat as soon as possible. In the distance, Xiao Kun's figure was as sharp as a spear, showing his absolute confidence. Many people in the field had burst into cheers. How could Lin Sun become the first in the quarterly assessment with such little strength when he was forced to retreat under one punch? This guy must have cheated in the quarterly assessment. Ning Meng and Yu both frowned. Judging from this blow, it seemed that Lin Sun was indeed a little inferior to Xiao Kun, which made them a little worried. However, Qi Kan, Mao Lengshan and others were a little confused. If Lin Sun lost this battle, he would not only make a fool of himself, but also the reputation of the Camp 39 would suffer a blow, which was not what they wanted. At the same time, if Lin Sun won, they would certainly not be happy in their hearts. There was no other way. They still had a deep prejudice and grudge against Lin Sun. Therefore, when witnessing such a battle, it was inevitable for them to be confused in their hearts. The battle has just begun. How can you be so confident? If you lose in the end, it will be a little embarrassing. Lin Sun took a deep breath and chuckled. Really? I'm looking forward to you defeating me. Unfortunately, I can hardly see any hope from you. Xiao Kun said indifferently. Boom. Lin Sun stopped talking nonsense and rushed forward. He still performed marching boxing, which was big and simple. This was a basic boxing method that everyone was very familiar with. However, when Lin Sun used it, it had a kind of great spirit that could conquer mountains and rivers and break dry weeds and smashed rotten wood. But Xiao Kun was not inferior to Lin Sun, and even more eye-catching than Lin Sun. His wind-roaring killing fist was sharp and had a terrible tearing force, like a raging storm. No matter in power or skill, it was far better than marching boxing. Boom, the two fought fiercely. For a moment, the wind of fists whistled in the field, and the sound was like thunder shaking the field. Sand and stones were flying, and the sky was dark. Under the attention of the crowd, it was obvious that Lin Sun was inferior to Xiao Kun and showed signs of being suppressed. But it was strange that Xiao Kun couldn't defeat Lin Sun completely in a short time. This made many people a little surprised. Lin Sun was only on the 8th level of martial realm, but he could hold on until now in a 1-to-1 fight with Xiao Kun, which was a little unusual. More importantly, Lin Sun had been using marching boxing from the beginning to the end. This basic boxing method, widely spread in the Empire, produced an effect that could compete with the wind-roaring killing fist in Lin Sun's hands, which was really amazing. If Lin Sun had the cultivation of the 9th level of martial realm and mastered a boxing method that was not inferior to the wind-roaring killing fist, what kind of fighting situation would emerge? It was unimaginable. At this time, those trainees from other camps who came with Xiao Kun also keenly perceived the subtlety of the fighting situation and couldn't help but frown. How could this happen? How could a person like Xiao Kun fail to defeat a guy on the 8th level of martial realm? Did he reserve his strength? Boom! Suddenly, Xiao Kun snorted coldly in the field. He jumped like a dragon, and a bright electric vortex wrapped around his fist. Then, Xiao Kun punched down violently. Wind-roaring killing fist. Electric kill. In an instant it was like a dazzling lightning striking down from the sky. The blazing fist light was so dazzling that many people present couldn't open their eyes. This was the unique skill of wind-roaring killing fist. Since Xiao Kun was forced to use it at this moment, he obviously recognized Lin Sun's tenacity and dared not to reserve any more. Almost at the same time, a touch of decisiveness flashed in Lin Sun's black eyes. His spiritual energy boiled and ran all over his body like a flood bursting a dam. Instead of retreating, he moved forward. His handsome figure rose from the ground like a rainbow and took the initiative to confront Xiao Kun. And the boxing he used was still a move of marching boxing, Songling suppressing the moon. Boom! With an earth-shattering collision, Lin Sun stepped back more than 10 steps, with his long black hair flying in the air. He looked embarrassed, but he didn't seem to be hurt. Looking at Xiao Kun, he also stepped back 4 or 5 steps before he stabilized himself. When he looked at Lin Sun again, his eyes were different from before. He really didn't expect that Lin Sun was more tenacious than he imagined. If it were other practitioners on the 8th level of martial realm, they would have been completely defeated by this electric kill. But Lin Sun just stepped back more than 10 steps, and judging from his momentum, he didn't show any sign of injury at all. At this moment there were many exclamations in the field. It seemed unbelievable that they couldn't imagine how Lin Sun could withstand this blow. These exclamations made Xiao Kun's face a little gloomy. With his cultivation at the peak of the 9th level of martial realm and the ancestral wind-roaring killing fist, he still couldn't defeat a guy on the 8th level of martial realm, which was really a shame. How about it? Are you lacking in confidence? Think about what you just said, it's really ironic, Lin Sun chuckled, his eyebrows as sharp as a knife, his eyes as sharp as lightning, and his words revealed a vague sense of ridicule. Humph! Xiao Kun snorted coldly, and the aura on his entire body actually rose a level. He roared towards the sky, and his entire body was like a howling storm that carried along a terrifying chaotic gale as he charged over explosively. He was like a storm, and his fist was the eye of the storm. The harsh whistling sound was like a blade, making many people in the field upset and almost unable to bear it. Rumble, the two fought against each other again. Compared with before, the battle at this moment was undoubtedly more intense, dangerous and ruthless. It was not like learning from each other at all, but clearly no different from a real fight. Xiao Kun's momentum was unparalleled, but Lin Sun didn't give in and was not suppressed. He always narrowly avoided Xiao Kun's killing move. Seeing this scene, many nearby practitioners' faces changed again. No one expected that Lin Sun's combat effectiveness was so tenacious, which was completely beyond their expectation. The only thing that made them feel lucky was that Lin Sun's current combat effectiveness was not really worthy of the title of the first place in the quarterly assessment. Even if Xiao Kun couldn't defeat him in a short time, he was doomed to be defeated by Xiao Kun as time went on. Unless there was a miracle. But was it possible? Can Lin Sun turn the situation around? Sure, Yu and Ning Meng in the distance couldn't be sure. If Lin Sun couldn't even defeat Xiao Kun, he couldn't compete with Bai Lingshi and Zhao Yin. In this way, it seemed to indirectly prove that his title of the first place in the quarterly assessment was somewhat undeserved. At that time, Lin Sun would become the object of ridicule in the entire bloodthirsty camp. This was the worst result. Clang! At this moment, Lin Sun suddenly pulled out the green wave saber in the field, and his punching method suddenly changed into the saber method, which immediately attracted the attention of all present. However, in their eyes, Lin Sun's move was undoubtedly a sign that he was driven to a dead end and had to change his fighting method. This made many people feel refreshed. Even Xiao Kun was no exception. He sneered, turned over his palm, and a short black spear appeared. Then he flew across the air to meet Lin Sun. Lin Sun, your struggle is doomed to be in vain. I advise you to admit defeat immediately, and maybe you can save some face. Xiao Kun shouted, and his voice shook the world. He held the spear and attacked. His figure was as fast as lightning, and his gray hair was dancing wildly, like an invincible god. Chapter 148. Boom! Xiao Kun rushed forward with his spear, pointing at the sky and hitting the earth with matchless divine power. A pitch-black short spear in his hand seemed to turn into a swift black thunderbolt with extremely terrible power. Many people were surprised. This was another first-class unique skill, Eagle Strike. Once it was performed, it was like an eagle flying in the sky, with the power to tear the universe apart. However, even under such an attack, Lin Sun was not inferior at all. With his green wave saber glowing with dazzling spiritual light, he performed the six-word saber play to the extreme. Sometimes he was like a storm, wantonly and ostentatious. Sometimes he was like a gurgling stream, lingering and fine. Sometimes he was like a vast raging wave, sweeping away dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. And sometimes he was like a snowstorm, freezing thousands of miles. Impermanent, formless, and unpredictable. Compared with the confrontation of fists just now, the duel between Lin Sun and Xiao Kun was more intense at this moment. One was powerful and aggressive, while the other was elegant and sharp with both offense and defense, full of a thrilling atmosphere. This kind of duel could already be regarded as a rare first-rate duel in the true martial realm. Xiao Kun was originally a young hero, and the wind-roaring killing fist and eagle strike spear technique that he practiced were both unique skills passed down from his ancestors, and they were extremely powerful. Lin Sun might not have shown his strength in the past, and he was even criticized and questioned because of his first place in the quarterly assessment. But at this moment, many people on the scene were surprised to see that he could fight evenly with Xiao Kun with the cultivation of the 8th level of martial realm. Bang! 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 The deafening collision sound was like two mountains fighting against each other. The terrible spiritual power spread, forcing the nearby trainees to retreat again and again. The most surprising thing was that Xiao Kun still couldn't suppress Lin Sun at this moment. Instead, Lin Sun gradually turned the situation around and they were evenly matched. This made many trainees in other camps shocked, and they finally realized that Lin Sun was not as simple as they thought. Compared with them, when the trainees of Camp 39 witnessed this scene, their emotions became extremely complicated. About a month ago, on the first day when Lin Sun broke through the 8th level of martial realm, he defeated Wen Mingxiu, who had made great achievements in the camp, with one punch. In the following time, Lin Sun's fighting capacity became stronger and stronger, and his score was higher and higher. Finally, before the quarterly assessment, his score had steadily ranked among the top in the camp. No one knew to what extent Lin Sun's fighting capacity had been improved. Even so, most people still couldn't imagine how Lin could get the first place in the quarterly assessment. It was like an incredible miracle, which made many people question Lin's result and think he must have cheated. But at this moment, when they saw the duel between Lin Sun and Shirao Kun, many people finally realized that Lin Sun was indeed different from before. According to the fighting capacity he showed at this time, he could even compete with Ning Meng, Shi Yu, Qi Kan, Gong Ming and others in the camp. This guy is improving too quickly. Perhaps it was a mistake for us to choose to be enemies with him. Mao Lingxin muttered in the distance with a complicated expression. Oh, do you think I did something wrong? Qi Kan's face darkened and he glanced at Mao Lingxin coldly. No, I just feel a little emotional. Mao Lingxin shook his head at once. Humph, remember, this guy will seek revenge for the smallest grievance. We have been incompatible with him for a long time. Don't have any other ideas in the future. Qi Kan said word by word. Mao Lingxin was silent. Unexpectedly, compared with the last monthly assessment, this guy's fighting capacity has been improved to such a high level. On the other side, Lei Xinhua frowned and felt a heavy pressure from Lin Sun. This guy is very strong. His sabersmanship is very unique, which is a real killing skill. Unfortunately, it is difficult to exert the full power of this sabersmanship in the martial realm. Yi Qi squinted his small eyes, and his fat face was full of seriousness. In the last monthly assessment, I fought with him in person. It was the first time for me to see this kind of sabersmanship that could be on par with the soul-embroidering sabersmanship of Yi family. If there is a chance, I really want to fight with him again and see whose sabersmanship is stronger. Hearing this, all trainees, including Lei Xinhua and Di Jun, were shocked. No one had expected that Yi Qi would give such a high evaluation of Lin Sun. He is indeed very powerful. Gong Ming, who had been silent all the time, opened his mouth, which was rare. I fought with him. At that time, his fighting capacity was not as good as mine, but when it came to courage and fighting will, I also felt great pressure. Otherwise, our Camp 40 would not have lost that time. Gong Ming was one of the top overmatches in Camp 40 at that time. At this moment, his words made others speechless for a while, and their hearts were full of ups and downs. Alas, I feel so depressed. Ning Meng breathed out gloomily. Ho-ho, I feel that after today's battle, those who really understand should realize that Lin Sun deserves his reputation. Shi Yu chuckled with a leisurely manner. What do you mean? Ning Meng frowned and said, he can't even defeat Shirao Kun. Who will believe that he deserves to be the first in the quarterly assessment? Don't you think before you speak? Shi Yu sneered. In the quarterly assessment, which one of them didn't prepare enough spiritual equipment? Just by relying on pure fighting capacity, you can ask those guys who have passed the quarterly assessment. Which one of them is confident to kill a barbarian soldier? After a pause he continued, smart people should know this. Otherwise, if Lin Sun cheats, do you think those drill masters in the camp can't see it? Ning Meng frowned and said, but this battle with Shirao Kun is so depressing. If it were me, I would have beaten this guy to kneel down and beg for mercy. Shi Yu agreed and said, no matter what the result of this battle is, in the future, Shirao Kun is destined to be unable to stop Lin Sun's progress. Ning Meng also nodded. Both of them were very clear that what Lin Sun lacked now was just time. When he advanced from the 8th level of martial realm to the 9th level, he would not be inferior to any other top trainee, let alone Shirao Kun. This was potential. But Shirao Kun, who had already reached the 9th level of martial realm and had inherited unique skills, still failed to suppress Lin Sun. Even if he won in the end, it would be very disgraceful. Anyone with the slightest bit of insight would be able to see this. The battle continued for the time it took to brew a cup of tea. Shirao Kun's face was extremely gloomy and his heart was burning with anger. Of course, He also knew that it was shameful enough that he couldn't suppress Lin Sun, a practitioner on the 8th level of martial realm, with his current cultivation and unique skills. Originally, Shirao Kun planned to defeat Lin Sun with his higher cultivation, even if it was a battle of attrition. Who would have thought, until now, Lin Sun didn't show any sign of weakness? How could it be possible? Did this guy, with the cultivation of the 8th level of martial realm, have the vigorous power that didn't belong to the 9th level of martial realm? What made Shirao Kun most afraid was that as he fought with Lin Sun, he was keenly aware that Lin Sun's spiritual energy was not only extremely vigorous, but also extremely pure and powerful. Lin Sun's spiritual energy was even one level higher than his own. Otherwise, Seo Kun would have suppressed his opponent ruthlessly with his absolute strength without the need to use any unique skills. It was incredible that a trainee on the 8th level of martial realm had such a profound cultivation foundation, and even the quality of his spiritual energy was first class. At this point, Shirao Kun was even a little scared. If Lin Sun had the cultivation of the 9th level of martial realm, what would the result of this battle be? He dared not think about it. The atmosphere in the field gradually became subtle. Many people had already noticed that Shirao Kun was in a situation where he was unable to back down. But Lin Sun, the teenager who was constantly questioned by them, showed amazing tenacity as the battle went on. Many people were unable to accept such a situation. Suddenly, an ethereal and light voice sounded in the field. "There is no need to continue this battle. Shirao Kun, you can step back." With the voice, people felt dizzy, and then a graceful figure suddenly appeared in the field. Swish! The black spear that Shirao Kun threw out was gently held by a white hand. With a gentle pull, Shirao Kun flew out uncontrollably. At the same time, Lin Sun felt that the saber in his hand paused, and then it was dragged by a terrible force and deviated to one side uncontrollably. Who? Shirao Kun and Lin Sun were both shocked, and they looked at the graceful figure that suddenly appeared in the field. Not only them, but also all the people in the field subconsciously looked at the figure. It was a young girl around 14 or 15 years of age. Her long, black hair cascaded down to her slender waist. Her eyebrows were like the moon, her nose was straight, and her lips were pink and moist. Her oval face exuded an ethereal and refreshing aura. Standing there casually, she had a kind of graceful and elegant temperament, which was a kind of ethereal beauty, as if she was above the mortal world. Bai Lingshi. When they saw her, the same name appeared in the minds of practically everyone present at the same time, and all of them felt shocked and ashamed of their inferiority. It was as if they were not facing a girl, but a pure and ethereal fairy, which made the atmosphere in the field fall into a short silence. Shirao Kun was extremely unhappy that the battle was interrupted, but when he saw Bai Lingshi, his anger suddenly disappeared, but there was still a trace of unwillingness on his face. Similarly, Lin Sun couldn't help frowning in the face of Bai Lingshi's sudden appearance. After he had seen the unparalleled beauty of Xia Ji, Bai Lingshi's ethereal beauty was not enough to shock Lin Sun. "Miss, do you know that we are engaged in a battle of personal honor? You have gone too far." Lin Sun frowned and said with a serious face. Many people's faces became slightly strange. What battle of honor? Wasn't it for the 2,000 condensate pills in the bet? What was more, even if they fought to the end, Shirao Kun might not be defeated. This guy was so shameless. Chapter 149. Bai Lingshi was very beautiful and charming, and her cultivation was outstanding. She had the rare talent property of starshine eternal. Moreover, she was the eldest granddaughter of Jinghai Marquis of the Empire, and her family background was also extremely prominent. Under such circumstances, it was not an exaggeration to call her a proud girl. In the bloodthirsty camp, many people regarded Bai Lingshi as the object of their love, and there were many childs with the same extraordinary background who chased after Bai Lingshi. No one dared to look down on such a goddess-like girl. However, Lin soon accused Bai Lingshi of meddling in other people's business with an interrogative look, which made many people very indignant. They thought that he didn't know what was good for him and blasphemed Bai Lingshi. Even Shi Yu's eyes became strange, and he muttered to himself, "This guy is just like poking a hornet's nest." Why was it said that femme fatale? Because there was no lack of love and pursuit around a beautiful woman, and naturally there was no lack of trouble. "How dare you!" Someone couldn't help but yell harshly. "You're so rude. Apologize to Miss Lingshi quickly, or we won't spare you." Many people followed and yelled as if they were her guardians. Lin Sun seemed to turn a deaf ear to them, and he was naturally a little unwilling in his heart. In the battle with Shiraokuan, he was almost half sure that he could defeat Shiraokuan, but now his plan was ruined by Bai Lingshi. It would be strange if he was in a good mood. As for the indignant yelling of a group of people around, Lin Sun just regarded it as a dog's bark. To everyone's surprise, in the face of Lin Sun's questioning, Bai Lingshi was not angry at all, and said indifferently, "If you win, I will let Shiraokuan give you all the condensate pills he lost in the bet." Shiraokuan was stunned and a little unwilling, but when he saw Bai Lingshi's ethereal and tranquil eyes, he finally held back and didn't say anything. Bai Lingshi's action immediately won a lot of applause. What was Beauty's demeanor? This was it. Compared with Lin Sun's face just now, it was extremely ugly. Lin Sun didn't seem to have such awareness. Although he was a little surprised by Bai Lingshi's decision, he still frowned and said, "In addition to these, there are also 1,000 condensate pills from that guy." He pointed to Wang Wenyuan in the distance. In an instant, Wang Wenyuan's face darkened and became extremely unsightly. This fellow was simply asking for a yard after being given an inch. Could it be that he really thought he had won? Bai Lingshi nodded and said, "I will still give it to you." Lin Sun said with a smile, "Yes, you are a sensible girl. I misunderstood you just now. Don't take it to heart." Everyone felt stifled in their hearts. Why is this fellow's tone so arrogant? Many people couldn't help rushing forward to beat Lin Sun. However, Bai Lingshi was still as elegant as before. Suddenly, she looked at Lin Sun and said, "When you reach the 9th level of martial realm, I will come to fight with you in person." After that, he turned around and left without waiting for Lin Sun's answer. Lin Sun was stunned and sighed in his heart. Sure enough, this girl was definitely not the kind of person who could be fooled easily. Her appearance at this time not only saved Shiraokuan's face, but also won a lot of praise from the audience. Finally, she threw a test to him, and he had no choice but to accept it. But Lin Sun was not afraid. Perhaps Bai Lingshi had an unimaginably horrible fighting capacity, but Lin Sun was confident that he would not be inferior to her when he reached the 9th level of martial realm. There was an uproar in the field. No one expected that Bai Lingshi's sudden appearance could end the fight between Shiraokuan and Lin Sun in such a way. Was Shiraokuan defeated? No. It was the result of Bai Lingshi's words. Maybe it was not convincing, but as the party concerned, Shiraokuan didn't say anything, so the others could only acquiesce. But the most surprising and uproar was Bai Lingshi's words before she left. She actually issued a letter of challenge to Lin Sun. This was so rare. Some people thought that Bai Lingshi did this to help Shiraokuan regain his face and stop Lin Sun from being so arrogant. Others thought that Bai Lingshi thought that when Lin Sun reached the 9th level of martial realm, he would be able to have a fair fight with her. The reason why she did this was that Lin Sun was too rude to her just now. But no matter what kind of speculation it was, many people in the field were looking forward to the arrival of this day. They were eager to see how Lin Sun, the clown, would be trampled by Bai Lingshi. Soon, the news of the fight between Lin Sun and Shiraokuan spread throughout the bloodthirsty camp. Although Shiraokuan lost, no one thought so. After all, if Bai Lingshi hadn't suddenly intervened, no one could be sure who would win the fight. However, Lin Sun's tenacious fighting capacity still attracted many people's attention. It was so unusual that a teenager on the 8th level of martial realm could fight with a top figure like Shirao Kuan. Because of this, there were fewer doubts about whether Lin Sun deserved the title of the first in the monthly assessment. In other words, the fight with Shirao Kuan also helped Lin Sun to resolve a lot of reproach and criticism. Bai Lingshi's letter of challenge to Lin Sun also attracted many people's attention. People couldn't help but speculate in their hearts. According to Bai Lingshi's identity, it seemed that she didn't have to do this, but she did it. Why on earth did she do it? No matter how the outside world talked about it, at least in Camp 39, Lin Sun had become a celebrity. Some people hated him, some envied him, and some admired and envied him. After all, in Camp 39, Lin Sun was undoubtedly the most famous one. Soon after the fight, Lin Sun was summoned and left Camp 39. Then, he was taken by Shu Sanqi into a mysterious and closed underground space in the camp. The area of this place wasn't large, and the four walls were inlaid with pieces of moonlight stones for illumination. One could clearly see that rows of jade shelves were arranged in the surroundings, and on them were placed books, pills, spiritual weapons, spiritual materials, and all kinds of rare treasures. It was just like a treasure vault. There are elixirs, cultivation methods, spiritual weapons, and all kinds of auxiliary items for cultivation. They are not very precious, but at least they are exquisite treasures that can't be seen in the world. You are the first in this quarterly assessment, so you can choose one of them. Shu Sanqi's words were still concise and to the point as usual, without any nonsense. Lin Sun nodded and moved forward to have a closer look. First, he looked at the cultivation method. Emerald Spirit Incantation, Purple Cloud Incantation, Blood Spirit Immortal Body, Astral Thunder Battle Scripture, Spirit Refinement Void Technique, Heavenly Yellow Heart Sutra. Every single cultivation technique had its own profundities, and they were indeed not things that could be bought on the market. Lin Sun carefully read the introduction of each scripture. After a while, he finally shook his head. In comparison, these scriptures were indeed first class, but they were a little worse than Nature Insight and Spirit Devour scripture. Then, Lin Sun looked at the bottles of elixirs: Xingyi Cyan Spirit Elixir, 7 Orifice Recovery Elixir, Snow Ginseng 9 Treasure Elixir, Purple Jade Cloud Elixir. In the process, Shu Sanqi had been watching quietly, without saying a word. But when he saw Lin Sun looking at all kinds of elixirs and spiritual materials, he couldn't help frowning and said, "Lin Sun, sometimes when there are too many choices, what you need to do is to choose the most suitable one for you, not the one with the highest value." Lin Sun said, "I see." As he said, he continued to look at everything in the treasure house, but he didn't choose one thing. Shu Sanqi said, "What on earth do you want?" There was a touch of sternness in his voice, as if he was a little disgusted with Lin Sun's behavior. Lin Sun turned his head and said to Shu Sanqi with a smile, "Drill Master Su, I heard from old Mo that your Wolf Fang, a spiritual armor with spiritual tattoos, was damaged and can't be repaired until now. I learned about it from old Mo, and in fact, it's not difficult to repair it." Shu Sanqi was shocked, and a pair of sharp eyes suddenly locked on Lin Sun. He was confirming the truth of Lin Sun's words. If it were someone else who was stared at by Shu Sanqi, he would have been scared to shrink his hands and feet. But Lin Sun seemed to be unaware of it. He smiled and pointed to some spiritual materials in the treasure house, saying, "I just looked at these treasures carefully and happened to find that several kinds of spiritual materials are the key treasures to repair Wolf Fang. But there are still 3 spiritual materials missing." Shu Sanqi couldn't help asking, "Which 3? Lin Sun said casually, "The heart of a 1,000-year-old ghost eye vine, a pair of fangs of an abyss demon wolf, and a bottle of golden blood spring, which can only be found in the magma of the Earth's core." Hearing this, Shu Sanqi narrowed his eyes slightly. He had heard of these 3 spiritual materials, but they were all rare treasures in the world. They rarely appeared in the market and could only be found by chance. Even with his current strength, it was difficult to collect them in a short time. Are you sure that as long as you find these 3 spiritual materials, you can repair Wolf Fang completely? After a long silence, Shu Sanqi asked in a low voice. I just provide some ideas for reference. I believe old Mo can definitely do it, Lin Sun said seriously. Shu Sanqi fell silent again. It seemed that this matter had brought a great shock to him, and he had to think carefully. I see. You can choose your reward first, Shu Sanqi said with a poker face after a while. Lin Sun smiled and took out a bottle of elixir called Purple Jade Cloud Pill, saying, I have already chosen it. This is it. Without saying anything more, Shu Sanqi turned around and left with Lin Sun. It seemed that old Mo didn't say anything to Lin Sun's words, but Lin Sun was very clear that if Shu Sanqi really regarded Wolf Fang as his life as old Mo said, he would not refuse his proposal. That night, when Lin Sun returned to old Mo's warehouse, he received a total of 2,000 condensate pills, which were worth 40,000 imperial silver coins, or as many as 200 imperial gold coins. Even in the bloodthirsty camp, it would take 6,000 points to exchange for such a number of condensate pills. It could be imagined that Shirao Kuan, Wang Wenyuan, and even trainees from other camps who came with them to provoke must have paid a huge price for it. Lying in the chair, Lin Sun was lost in thought. A bottle of purple jade cloud pill and 2,000 condensate pills should be enough to support me to break through the 9th level of martial realm, right? Chapter 150. Late at night, Lin Sun sat cross-legged, and the road map of the Palace of Nature Insight and Spirit Devour Scripture appeared clearly in his mind. Clatter after making sure that there were no mistakes, Lin Sun swallowed 10 condensate pills, held his breath, and began to concentrate on cultivation. This was the first time for him to practice this scripture. It was a new experience, so he dared not to have any negligence or carelessness. Soon, Lin Sun felt a shock all over his body. The spiritual energy in his body was like an ignited volcano, drawn by an overbearing and terrible swallowing force. Along a unique track, the spiritual energy surged all over his body. Boom! The surging spiritual energy was like a raging sea, circulating along the meridians and acupoints all over his body. In his whole body, the power of every inch of tendons, bones, blood and muscles seemed to be awakened and vibrated all over his body. Inside, the spiritual energy was like a wild horse, whistling and circulating like a dragon. Outside, the blood and chi burst out like lava, producing a unique resonance with every inch of muscles, bones and blood. At this moment, every part of Lin Sun's body seemed to be fully activated, producing a new way of cultivation. From a distance, his whole body was like a big abyss, with a terrible storm surging inside, and outside, it was swallowing the power from all directions. This was Nature Insight and Spirit Devour Scripture, a rare method for refining both body and chi. It was inherited from the heaven accessing place, mysterious and overbearing. In just 15 minutes, Lin Sun felt that the power of the 10 condensate pills he had just swallowed was completely refined. At this time, it was less than half to the completion. In the past, he only needed the power of 10 cold condensing pills at most for one night of meditation. But now, after practicing the Nature Insight and Spirit Devour Scripture, the power that he needed to refine and absorb was far from enough. Clatter without hesitation, Lin Sun swallowed another 10 condensate pills. Boom! Inside and outside his body, the power was surging like the Yangtze River and boiling like the eruption of a volcano, which made Lin Sun's body slightly painful. It seemed that he could not bear the impact of such power. Especially his body, it felt like it was a steel bar that had been fiercely twisted, and every single inch of his skin, tendons, and bones were enduring a type of high-frequency tempering. If he hadn't tempered his body to the extreme, then he would probably be utterly unable to endure this unique method of cultivation. This was the strength of the Nature Insight and Spirit Devour Scripture. It was domineering and marvelous. It was like a furnace on the inside while swallowing everything on the outside, and it was completely different from the orthodox cultivation methods of the world. Not long after, the condensate pills he swallowed for the second time were all refined again, so Lin soon had to swallow 10 more. Fortunately, he won 2,000 cold condensing pills after the duel with Shurao Kuan this time. Otherwise, with the supply of 10 cold condensing pills that he enjoyed every day, he was afraid that it would not be enough for him to continue his cultivation. As time went by, Lin Sun's whole body was shrouded in a layer of mist, which was a unique scene that could only be formed when Lin Sun exerted his power to the extreme. After half an hour, Lin Sun suddenly opened his eyes, and his qi gradually fell into silence from the boiling state. Lin Sun exhaled, and a white smoke rushed out like an air arrow, faintly making the sound of wind and thunder, tearing the air apart. The wonderful operation of this scripture is really beyond imagination, but it's too domineering. Lin Sun felt the qi around him, and marveled in his heart. He knew very well that if it weren't for his strong physique, he couldn't bear such a domineering way of cultivation at all. However, although this scripture was extremely domineering, its effect was indeed obvious. Just like at this moment, Lin Sun was keenly aware that although his cultivation didn't improve much, the quality of his spiritual power had improved again. The strands of spiritual energy in his body were like azure amber. They were crystal clear and pure, and there was a trace of bright luster in them. This also meant that when Lin Sun fought, the power released by his spiritual power would become stronger and more terrible. Lin finally realized that it was not only the 4 spiritual vortexes on the 4 acupoints of his heart vessel that helped him refine his spiritual energy, but also the nature insight and spirit devour scripture that he practiced had incredible effects on refining spiritual energy. This was indeed an exciting thing. At least everything proved that the effect of the nature insight and spirit devour scripture was much stronger than that of the spirit concentrating manual. The only thing that bothered Lin Sun was that the cultivation of the nature insight and spirit devour scripture consumed too many elixirs. Because of the 4 spiritual vortexes, Lin Sun's cultivation was different from that of other practitioners of the same generation, and he needed more spiritual power to supplement. Now, with the addition of the cultivation of the nature insight and spirit devour scripture, he would consume almost 30 condensate pills a day. This number was equivalent to 600 imperial silver coins. In other words, if Lin Sun continued to cultivate like this, he would consume at least 600 imperial silver coins a day, which was a huge figure beyond imagination. After a long time, even those from rich families might not be able to support it. Even if I leave the bloodthirsty camp in the future, making money must be the first priority. Lin Sun made up his mind. The days in the bloodthirsty camp returned to the past. Every day there was nothing but training, which was fulfilling but really boring. More than 10 days had passed unconsciously. During this period, all trainees received a notice that in half a month, the trainees of the 8 camps of the bloodthirsty camp would set out together to participate in a new assessment, battlefield training. The battlefield was a real battlefield, located in the northern frontier of the empire. It was a place called Demon Cloud Ridge. In the depths of the Demon Cloud Ridge, there were many voodoo barbarians. The assessment for Lin Sun and other trainees was to enter the northern frontier of the empire and participate in the War of the Demon Cloud Ridge as ordinary soldiers of the empire. At that time, the more military merits they earned, the higher the assessment results would be. The less military merits they earned, the more likely they would be eliminated. It was worth mentioning that the battlefield training was a real life and death fight, and death would also threaten every trainee. Some people were looking forward to the assessment, while others were afraid of it. Because no matter how abnormal the training in the bloodthirsty camp was, at least there was no danger of life. But it was different on the battlefield. One careless mistake could kill people, which was the most frightening thing. Lin Sun also received the notice. He didn't care much about it, but he wouldn't take it lightly either. His mind was very steady. One night, when Lin Sun was practicing, young Ku suddenly came and took him away without giving Lin Sun any chance to refuse. When they arrived at the central camp where Shu Sanqi was, Lin Sun found that not only Shu Sanqi but also old Mo was there. Is it for the restoration of Wolf Fang? Lin Sun thought. More than 10 days ago, he had mentioned this to Shu Sanqi, but he was not sure when Shu Sanqi would come to him for help. But this time, Lin Sun guessed wrong. When Shu Sanqi saw him, he pointed to the table on one side and said, "Is this your storage ring?" Lin Sun looked up and saw a black storage ring on the table, which was brought by him before. He couldn't help but nod, yes. All of a sudden, old Mo looked anxious and said, "Lin Sun, what the hell is hidden in your storage ring? How can it release such a weird power?" Lin Sun was stunned and confused. He couldn't help but step forward and look at the storage ring carefully. As expected, he sensed that there was a wisp of obscure and violent power spreading from the storage ring. It seemed to be extremely weak, but it gave people a terrible pressure on their souls. Lin Sun couldn't help but narrow his eyes. "Old Mo, when did this happen?" "Just now." Shu Sanqi frowned. "Don't you know what's hidden in your storage ring?" Old Mo and young Ku also looked at Lin Sun, which made Lin Sun more confused. He clearly remembered that there was only a sky breacher, an inscribing pen, some gold coins and spiritual materials in his storage ring. Apart from that, there seemed to be nothing special. "Shall I open it and have a look first?" Lin Sun asked. Shu Sanqi and old Mo looked at each other and said, "Well, be careful." Lin Sun nodded and stepped forward. He gently touched the storage ring with his fingertip. In an instant, Lin Sun finally determined the source of the obscure and violent fluctuation. It was a bronze box with an ancient color on its surface. Its 4 corners were engraved with patterns of clouds, mountains and rivers, strange beasts, and the sun and the moon. Around the box, there were mysterious spiritual tattoos, releasing an obscure and palpitating aura. That was the power of spiritual tattoos. But at this time, the spiritual tattoos around the bronze box seemed to be on the verge of breaking, as if they could not suppress a certain power sealed in the box. Lin Sun remembered that this bronze box was obtained when he killed Lu Yukuan. At that time, in the 3,000 mountains, Lu Yukuan was chased by a legendary golden flame beast. Because of some accident, he wanted to kill Lin Sun, but he was killed by Lin Sun in the end. Lu Yukuan was the son of Lu Wujuan of the southwest province of the empire, which involved a lot of things. In order to prevent revenge, all the things he left before his death were destroyed by Lin Sun, except for this bronze box. At that time, Lin Sun also tried to open this box to explore, but when he saw the spiritual tattoos around the box, Lin Sun completely gave up. Because if one couldn't see through the mystery of this kind of spiritual tattoo restriction, even a spiritual tattoo master couldn't do anything about it. But what Lin Sun didn't expect was why this bronze box suddenly changed today. Could it be that some kind of change had happened to the treasure in it and it was about to break the seal? What on earth is inside? Seeing Lin Sun's uncertain look, old Mo couldn't help asking. A bronze box of unknown origin. As Lin Sun said this, he took it out of the storage ring. But as soon as it appeared in the air, it suddenly changed. With a loud bang, the bronze chest suddenly exploded, and a ball of dazzling fire rushed out fiercely and bumped into Lin Sun's arms. Lin Sun didn't even have time to react. He felt like being hit by a mountain. With pain all over his body, he flew out uncontrollably. Chapter 151. Lin Sun felt a sharp pain all over his body, and he almost fainted. He couldn't help gasping. Chirp, chirp, a tender voice sounded. Lin Sun looked down in astonishment, only to find that it was a little monster in his arms. Its whole body was glowing with golden flames. It had round eyes, a round nose, and round ears. Even its body was as round as a small ball. Except for its facial features, it had no neck or limbs. The biggest impression it gave people was that it was round. At this moment, it looked at Lin Sun curiously with its crystal black eyes, and chirping sounds came from its round mouth. Lin Sun's eyes widened. What the hell was this? Who would have thought that such a small thing would be sealed in a bronze chest of mysterious origins? What's this? Shu Sanqi, old Mo, and young Ku also came over and looked at the little monster in astonishment. Obviously, they didn't expect that such a little thing would come out of the bronze chest that released terrible and obscure wave. It seems to have a similar breath to the golden flame beast, but its appearance is completely different. Look at its appearance. It's overflowing with golden light. How beautiful it is! Old Mo said in amazement. It seems that this kind of beast has never been recorded in the Atlas of Beasts. It's really strange. Shu Sanqi frowned. From the little monster in front of him, he was keenly aware of a trace of violent and palpitating breath, which was very unusual. Lin Sun, do you know its origin? Young Ku looked up at Lin Sun. Lin Sun rubbed his aching chest and said with a grimace, I only knew that the bronze chest was obtained from a golden flame beast, but I didn't know that such a little thing was sealed in it. The little thing seemed to think that Lin Sun was talking to it, and it chirped happily. It seemed to be very happy. Then, its soft and round body flew up and clung tightly to Lin Sun, showing a comfortable expression, like a child snuggling up to its mother. Lin Sun couldn't help reaching out to touch the little thing. He felt that his fingers were sinking into a ball of cotton, which was soft and bouncy, very comfortable. The little thing chirped, seeming to like being comforted by Lin Sun. Fortunately, after knocking Lin Sun away, the little thing didn't reveal any dangerous breath, so Lin Sun didn't worry about it. Golden flame beast? Young Ku said thoughtfully. Is it the one that appeared in the 3,000 mountains last year? I heard that this beast was eventually killed by Shai Yutong, the young sword king of Green Deer School. How did this bronze chest appear in your hands again? Lin Sun felt a chill in his heart, realizing that what he had said just now had inadvertently revealed a lot of things. He said in a daze, I only remember that when the golden flame beast was still alive, this bronze chest was snatched away. It was also a coincidence that I obtained it. Young Ku was about to continue asking when she was interrupted by Shu Sanqi. Let's not care about this for now. The urgent matter at hand is to confirm this little fellow's identity. Old Mo said in a low voice, the aura of this little guy is indeed similar to that of the golden flame beast, but it doesn't seem to be a real golden flame beast. It may be the cub of a strange beast that we have never seen before. Old Mo was a master of spiritual tattoos, and was very knowledgeable. Even he couldn't figure out the origin of this little guy, which surprised Shu Sanqi and Young Ku. Do you want to have a specific test? Old Mo suddenly asked Lin. How do we test it? Lin Sun suddenly felt that something was wrong. He felt that Old Mo's eyes seemed to be a little different at this moment. It's very simple. As expected, the next moment, Old Mo looked excited and crazy. He fixed his eyes on the little guy in Lin Sun's arms and said quickly, just like we spiritual tattooists dissect the body of a fierce beast. We peel off its skin, take out its bones, draw its blood, and test its spirit. Well, we can also dig out its pair of eyes. Maybe we can identify some special functions. By the way, smash its small head to see if there is a structure different from that of other fierce beasts. The more he said, the more excited he became. His saliva flew everywhere and he danced with joy. Think about it. This is a beast that we have never seen before. Maybe we can refine some spiritual materials that have never existed in the world from it. In that case, we may be able to create a new kind of spiritual ink. Before he finished listening, Lin Sun's face changed slightly. He felt that the little guy in his arms seemed to be aware of the danger and was shivering and chirping non-stop. Shu Sanqi couldn't help but frown. But he also knew that spiritual tattooists were as excited as discovering a new world when they found a new species. To everyone's surprise, it was Young Ku who couldn't bear it anymore. She kicked old Mo away with a beautiful whip kick. Pervert. Cruel. How could you do that to such a cute little guy? Young Ku scolded coldly. Old Mo lamented with a hidden bitterness. Madam, this little guy looks silly and cute, but who can be sure that it won't become very dangerous in the future? If we don't thoroughly find out its background now, it will be too late to regret later. He got up and walked to Lin Sun. Looking at the little guy with fanatical eyes, he said, "For the safety of all of us, give this little guy to me." "No way." Lin Sun and Young Ku said in unison with a firm attitude. Chirp, the little guy also stared at old Mo with a pair of round eyes and bared its teeth. In the end, it was Shu Sanchi who made the decision. "This is Lin Sun's. Let him deal with it." Lin Sun immediately breathed a sigh of relief, and Young Ku's look became much softer, which made Lin Sun a little uncomfortable. Young Ku, who had always been indifferent and cold, couldn't really fall in love with this silly and cute little guy. However, if this little guy poses a threat to the safety of the camp, I will kill it immediately, Shu Sanchi added, which made Lin Sun's heart tremble. Late at night, in old Mo's warehouse, Lin Sun sat in a chair, kneading Chirp's soft and round body into various shapes like kneading dough. Sometimes it was twisted like a fried dough twist, and sometimes it was stretched flat and slender, showing amazing softness and elasticity. Instead of being annoyed, Chirps made a cheerful chirping sound, as if it was moaning after being massaged, which made Lin Sun quite happy. This little guy was really amazing. Like a small ball, its whole body glowed with golden fire, but it was soft and comfortable to touch. Asterisk whoosh. Asterisk Chirps fell to the ground and immediately bounced up. Then it was thrown to the wall by Lin Sun and bounced back. Young Ku sat in the distance and held her chin as she watched all of this silently. Her usually cold and calm and delicate face was suffused with a rare gentleness at this moment. She didn't say anything from the beginning to the end. But tonight, she followed Lin Sun to old Mo's warehouse and stayed there for such a long time, which was very unusual. Perhaps she was really attracted to Chiochio. At first, Lin Sun felt a little strange about it, but later he didn't bother to pay attention to it. I don't know where this little guy came from. He looks stupid and adorable. I wonder what he will become in the future. Not long after, Lin Sun held Chirps in his hand and looked at the little guy's round face. The more he looked at it, the more he felt that it was not a powerful descendant of a fierce beast at all, but a silly pet. Lin Sun couldn't help but pinch Chirp's belly hard. With a whoosh, a flame spurted out of Chirp's mouth like lightning. With a bang, a bottomless hole was broken on the ground, and the terrible burning breath melted and evaporated the gravel there. Lin Sun was shocked and couldn't help but be a little surprised. He didn't expect that Chirps could spit fire with such terrible power. This power was at least equivalent to a full blow from a practitioner on the 9th level of martial realm. At this moment, Young Ku also stood up suddenly and looked at the hole in the ground, obviously a little surprised. Chirps looked innocent, rolling its ball-like body happily in Lin Sun's hand and crying heartlessly. I told you that this little guy looks kind, but there is a great danger hidden in its body. Maybe it will break out one day. Old Mo also came over and murmured, "If you dare to touch it, I will destroy you first." Young Ku glanced at old Mo indifferently and said calmly, but it made old Mo stiffen all over and smile bitterly. "Well, it seems to be hungry." Lin Sun felt a pain on his fingertip, and then Chirps opened its mouth and bit it. It kept swallowing as if it was sucking milk. Young Ku immediately said, "Wait a minute." Then she instantly rushed out of old Mo's warehouse. In just a moment, Young Ku had already returned with a huge green-horned giant wolf. She threw it on the ground with a bang and said, "After this female wolf was caught, we kept her because she was pregnant. She just gave birth a few days ago, so there's plenty of milk." Lin Sun hurried forward and took Chirps to find milk. Unexpectedly, the green-horned wolf seemed to sense some danger at this time. It let out a frightened roar and struggled violently. "What?" Lin Sun, Young Ku, and Old Mo all narrowed their eyes and realized that the problem should be with Chirps. Chirps, it looked confused and showed no interest in the green-horned wolf. Maybe we can feed it some spiritual fruits and vegetables. Old Mo couldn't help suggesting. Young Ku nodded and left with the green-horned giant wolf, who was frightened out of its wits. That night, with Young Ku's full help, Chirps tried all kinds of spiritual fruits and vegetables, but they couldn't find any that the little guy liked. It even didn't want to take a bite. Young Ku couldn't help frowning. Lin Sun was a little impatient. He slapped Chirps on its soft little butt and said, "I will be tortured to death by you." Chirps opened its eyes pitifully and seemed to be aggrieved. "Hey, this is a picky guy. Come on, do you want to taste the spiritual crystal?" Old Mo teased Chirps with a piece of hard spiritual crystal. Young Ku widened her eyes and was about to lose her temper, but she suddenly saw that Chirps, like a flash of lightning, snatched the spiritual crystal from Old Mo's hand and swallowed it into its round belly. Old Mo immediately let out a squeal like a pig being slaughtered. No! Chapter 152. Spiritual crystal was extremely valuable, containing extremely pure and huge spiritual energy. It had always been regarded as an important strategic material in the empire. A palm-sized ordinary spiritual crystal was worth 10 imperial silver coins. The spiritual crystal that Old Mo took out was different from ordinary spiritual crystals. It was called Advanced Spiritual Crystal. It was diamond-shaped, as clear as a crystal diamond, and glowed with light blue spiritual light. Generally, it was used as the spiritual power source of battleship. The value of this high-level spiritual crystal was even more terrifying, which was equal to 5 imperial gold coins. In other words, the value of a high-level spiritual crystal was about 50 times that of an ordinary one. At this moment, such an expensive high-level spiritual crystal was swallowed by Chirps in the blink of an eye, which made Old Mo go crazy and howl. He rushed up to take it back, but Chirps dodged and rushed into Lin Sun's arms in a flash. Then it looked at Old Mo innocently. Old Mo was exasperated and shouted, "Lin Sun, make this little thing spit out the spiritual crystal. This thing is very precious. It can't be wasted by this little thing." Lin Sun shrugged and said helplessly, "It can spit fire from its mouth. How about you try to make it spit it out?" Old Mo was stunned. Looking at the hole on the ground beside him, he shook his head at once. What a joke. It was too dangerous. "Well, Old Mo, you gave it to me. Are you going to regret it?" Young Ku frowned and said, "No, it's this, alas." Old Mo wanted to cry but had no tears. He couldn't even say a word, looking regretful. Lin Sun felt sorry for him. Chirps burped at this time as if it was full. Its soft and round body lay lazily in Lin Sun's arms. Chirps closed its eyes comfortably and fell asleep, blowing a crystal bubble at the corner of its mouth. "It seems that it can't make it," Lin Sun said helplessly. Old Mo was completely dumbfounded. This little thing's stomach was so good. How could it digest a high-level spiritual crystal in the blink of an eye? "It seems that it needs spiritual crystals," Young Ku said thoughtfully. Lin Sun was stunned for a moment, and suddenly a bad feeling surged in his heart. If this little guy fed on spiritual crystals, he couldn't afford to raise it even if he killed himself. "Drill Master Young Ku, how about giving Chirps to you?" Lin asked tentatively. Young Ku was startled and frowned. "Chiu likes you so much and obviously treats you as a family member. How can you abandon it so cruelly?" Lin Sun smiled bitterly. Seeing this, Old Mo's depressed mood finally became better. He said with a smile, "I'd like to see how many spiritual crystals you have to feed it." Lin Sun felt a headache. Young Ku said, "Well, that's it. I'll find time to visit Chirps in the future. If I find that you and Old Mo can't take good care of it," her eyes became extremely sharp, which made Lin Sun and Old Mo feel a kind of oppressive force at the same time. Their faces couldn't help changing slightly. "You know what I mean." Young Ku turned around and left. Lin Sun and old Mo looked at each other, feeling that they were in the same boat. In the next few days, Lin Sun was still different from before. But there was something different, because he had Chirps by his side. This little guy was stupid, cute and simple, and regarded Lin Sun as a family member. Every day, as long as Lin Sun returned to old Mo's warehouse after training, it would stick to him and rub itself happily in his arms. Lin Sun was a little uncomfortable at first, but he got used to it later. What really troubled him was that he had confirmed that Chirps did live by swallowing spiritual crystals. Every 3 days, it would consume a high-level spiritual crystal. The speed of spending money was almost as fast as that of Lin Sun. Fortunately, at least in the bloodthirsty camp, Lin Sun didn't have to worry too much about this matter with Young Ku's help. The only thing that made Lin Sun feel strange was that since the quarterly assessment, Young Man seemed to have disappeared and never appeared again. When he asked old Mo, he didn't know where Young Man had gone. As time went by, there were only 5 days left before they went to the battlefield assessment in the Demon Cloud Ridge. On this day, when Lin Sun finished a day's training and returned to old Mo's warehouse, he heard a familiar coquettish laughter echoing. Lin Sun was delighted that Young Man was back. As expected, when he walked into the warehouse, he saw Young Man holding Chirps with a smile and constantly rubbing its soft and round body with her hands, as if she had found the best toy in the world. She was beaming with joy. "Sister, you are back?" Lin Sun walked over with a smile. Young Man answered with and didn't even look at Lin Sun. She was still playing with Chirps. Lin Sun was speechless. Why did Drillmaster Young Ku and Young Man behave like this? What was so good about Chirps? Why did they like it so much? Are you jealous of its treatment? Old Mo came over with an envious face. His eyes were fixed on Chirps buried in Young Man's plump chest, and he was so jealous that he wanted to replace Chirps with himself. Old Mo, do you think I will be jealous of a little beast? Lin Sun said angrily. At this time, Chirps found Lin Sun. It broke free from Young Man's arms and got into Lin Sun's arms, chirping happily. Lin Sun immediately smiled and said to old Mo, "Look, this little guy is better than you. At least it is not as greedy for beauty as you are." "I think this little guy is 100 times better than you too," Young Man said with emotion, her starry eyes rolling. Bang! Suddenly, the door of the warehouse was pushed open by a strong force, and a cold wind poured in, which made the atmosphere in the warehouse chilly. "Shu Sanchi, I'm not here to fight with you this time. I just want to take away 2 people. Why do you hate me so much?" A low and deep voice sounded. The voice was full of an indescribable magic, which seemed to be able to reach the depths of the soul and make people feel cold. With the voice, a slender figure strode in. It was an elegant and graceful middle-aged man, wearing a high hat and ancient clothes with big sleeves. He was handsome, and when he opened and closed his eyes, there was a cold light surging in them. With his arrival, the atmosphere in the field suddenly became dead, and even the sound of the wind stopped, as if it was afraid. Next to the man was Shu Sanchi, who was as thin as a spear. But different from before, Shu Sanchi frowned at this moment, and his rock-hard face was full of gloom. Seeing this scene, Lin Sun, Young Man and old Mo all felt a chill in their hearts. Even Chirps in Lin Sun's arms seemed to have already sensed some danger and hid in Lin Sun's clothes. Well, this must be Master Mo. As soon as the graceful man came in, he was like a king of the world, with a disdainful momentum of controlling the mountains and rivers. His eyes instantly locked on old Mo like lightning. In an instant, old Mo's face suddenly changed, and he was trembling all over, as if he was suffering from some kind of fear. Lin Sun and Young Man did not dare to move. Their cultivation was different, but at this moment they both felt a kind of horrible oppression, as if they were in a vast ocean and were in danger of drowning and dying at any time. It was terrible. It was just an invisible momentum, but it could make people feel such a terrible impact. It could be imagined how powerful the graceful man was. At this time, Shu Sanchi suddenly stepped forward and stood in front of them. He looked up at the graceful man and said, "Shin Rudi, this is the bloodthirsty camp, not a place where you can behave atrociously." Lin Sun and others felt relaxed, and the pressure faded away like a tide. When they looked at the graceful man again, their eyes were full of fear. The graceful man called Shin Rudi smiled slightly, showing his snow-white teeth, and said, 13 years ago, I was not your opponent, but now your wolf fang has been damaged. Do you think you can still be my opponent? Do you want to have a try?" Shu Sanchi's eyes were as cold as a knife, and his momentum suddenly changed, surging with a gust of killing intent, which oppressed the air around him and made the sound of wailing. After a moment of silence, Shin Rudi suddenly looked up to the sky and laughed. "Old man, I haven't seen you for so many years, but you still have such a bad temper. If I didn't have an important task this time, I would really like to fight with you and see whether your wolf fang or my seal of Aquarius is more powerful." Seal of Aquarius. Hearing this word, Shu Sanchi's eyes suddenly narrowed. "No wonder you dare to be so fearless today. Which old guy from the Academy of Spiritual Implements made it for you?" Shin Rudi smiled and said, "It's a secret." Saying this, he frowned and said, "Get out of the way. I'm under orders to take away Master Mo and a teenager named Lin Sun. I'm not here to fight with you." Lin Sun was shocked in his heart, for he never thought that this matter would have something to do with him. Even young man was a little surprised, but soon she seemed to guess something, and her pretty face suddenly became a little ugly. "Give me a reason." Shu Sanchi didn't give in and said coldly. Shin Rudi said meaningfully, "The Empire's Academy of Spiritual Implements needs talents like them." A cold light suddenly burst out of Shu Sanchi's eyes. "You already know?" Shin Rudi chuckled. "Shu Sanchi, you should know that the bloodthirsty camp serves the Empire, not your private territory. Who do you think you can hide what happened here?" Shu Sanchi's face became more and more gloomy and he said flatly, "No matter what, I can't promise you this." Shin Rudi seemed to have expected this scene. He took out a mysterious lavender token from his bosom and said, "You should know the meaning of this token. Are you really going to disobey the order?" Seeing this token, Shu Sanchi finally couldn't keep calm. His face kept changing, and he fell into a rare silence. The atmosphere became so oppressive that it was almost suffocating. Lin Sun vaguely guessed something, but he was not sure, so he was surprised and doubtful. Young man's and old Mo's faces had already become gloomy. They seemed to have completely understood why Shin Rudi came here. "Old man, the Empire's interests are above everything. You should know this. Now, please get out of the way." Shin Rudi put away the token and took a deep breath. His face became solemn and dignified, which was extremely threatening. Chapter 153. Boom. The terrible momentum was overwhelming to Shu Sanchi like a landslide and a tsunami. Shu Sanchi suddenly sneered and punched. It was a simple punch, but it made Shin Rudi change his face slightly and block it with his palm. Unexpectedly, Shu Sanchi arched his body forward slightly. When his right fist hit Shin Rudi's palm, his left arm was thrown out like a cannon hammer and hit on Shin Rudi's shoulder with a bang. Shin Rudi's body shook violently, and his face suddenly turned blue. Finally, he couldn't help but take a step back. "You!" Shin Rudi was angry. When he was about to fight back, Shu Sanchi suddenly withdrew his momentum and stood aside, saying coldly, "What? Do you really want to fight with me?" Shin Rudi stared at Shu Sanchi for a long time and suddenly laughed. "Old man, you are still the same. You are never willing to suffer losses." Shu Sanchi said expressionlessly, "I dare not disobey the will of the Empire. But this time, you can take old Mo away and Lin must stay." As soon as the words came out, Lin Sun frowned. He didn't know why Shu Sanchi changed his attitude. Young man's face changed. She wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Old Mo laughed at this moment. "Well, I've already had enough of this remote place. It will be good if I can return to the Academy of Spiritual Implements of the Empire this time. Shinrudi glanced at Shu Sanchi and said, I received the order that I must take both of them back. Shu Sanchi said coldly, You came here for nothing more than the news about the new Zing battleship and Meteor's crossbow. I can tell you clearly that these two treasures are made by old Mo and have little to do with Lin. At this moment, Lin Sun finally realized the root of the problem. It turned out that everything was caused by the Zing battleship and Meteor's crossbow. For a moment, his mood suddenly became complicated. What was this? An innocent man will get into trouble because of his treasures? At a glance, he knew that Shinrudi's origin was not simple. He was obviously a big shot in the upper class of the Empire. But this time, he came to the bloodthirsty camp in person to ask for Lin, which showed how much importance the Empire attached to this matter. Logically speaking, it should be a good thing for old Mo and Lin Sun, but judging from the expressions of Shu Sanchi, young man and old Mo, they knew that it would not be a simple thing. Oh, Shinrudi replied. Obviously, he didn't believe it. He didn't even intend to change his attitude and determination. He said directly, No matter whether it is related to this boy or not, after I bring him back to Purple Chase City, I will be able to distinguish it. As he spoke, he glanced at Lin Sun intentionally or unintentionally, which made Lin Sun feel as if his chi was frozen and his hair stood on end. It was as if he was stared at by an ancient fierce beast and wanted to devour him. How terrifying was Exhilarating's cultivation? Lin Sun couldn't speculate. However, the more it was like this, the heavier his mood became. The consequences of being targeted by such a great figure were truly hard to predict. If you want to take him away, you might as well kill me now, old Mo suddenly said with a determined look on his skinny old face. At this moment, old Mo was completely different from before. He didn't look wretched anymore. Instead, he looked calm and disdainful, as if he was going to die. This made Lin Sun's heart tremble. In an instant, various emotions arose in his heart. He recalled the experience of working together with old Mo these days. Every scene was so clear. A spiritual tattoo master threatened him with his own life. This kind of situation also made Shinrudi feel a little tricky. He couldn't help but frown and said in a cold voice, Master Mo, do you know that this is against the will of the Empire? Enough. Shu Sanchi took a deep breath and said coldly, I will bear all the consequences. If you don't agree, maybe we really have to fight again today. Shinrudi's face was gloomy, and the atmosphere became tense, which made it difficult for people to breathe. Good, very good. Since you are so resolute, let's wait and see how those big shots in Purple Chase City will treat this matter. Shinrudi coldly said, then turned around and left. When he was in front of the warehouse, he suddenly turned his head and said, Before dawn tomorrow, I hope Master Mo will take the initiative to leave with me. If there is any accident, maybe the bloodthirsty camp will be completely closed as before. Before his voice died away, he had disappeared in the night. There was a moment of silence in the warehouse. Shu Sanchi kept silent and seemed to be thinking about something. Young man's pretty face was gloomy, and she was a little lost. Old Mo seemed to be much more at ease. He patted Lin Sun's shoulder and said, Boy, don't think too much. It's not a farewell of life and death. With the secret method of transforming Zing battleship that I have mastered, they dare not do anything to me. As he said, he smiled and said proudly, On the contrary, they will definitely treat me like a master, with beauties, wealth, status, honor. I can have anything I want. Lin Sun stared at old Mo's smiling face in a daze. After a long time, he said seriously, Old Mo, your acting is too fake. It doesn't comfort me at all. Old Mo's expression froze, and he said with a wry smile, What else do you want me to say? Lin Sun took a deep breath and said firmly, No matter who ordered to take you away this time, I will make him pay for it in person one day. Old Mo's countenance changed instantly. His lips trembled a few times, but he didn't say anything in the end. He just patted Lin Sun's shoulder hard and smiled with relief. At this time, Shu Sanqi turned his head and said, "This is not the worst result. Even if Shin Rudi doesn't come this time, someone else will come sooner or later." Old Emo nodded and said, "Chief Shu is right. The secret of Ziying battleship can't be concealed. This kind of war weapon must be handed over to the Academy of Spiritual Implements of the Empire in order to play the greatest role." Seeing that old Emo understood, Shu Sanqi nodded and said, "Tomorrow morning, I will send you away in person." After that, Shu Sanqi also turned around and left. Old Emo was in a daze for a long time. Finally, he shook his head and said, "I also need to prepare something." Saying this, he hurriedly got into his own room deep in the warehouse. Lin Sun knew that old Emo didn't want to say anything more at this moment. He was afraid that Lin Sun would have more misunderstandings and make him worry. This old guy. Lin Sun sighed with mixed feelings. Old Emo was a good person. During this period, he accompanied Lin Sun like an old friend. But now he was suddenly forced to leave, and Lin Sun was unable to change anything. This feeling of helplessness and powerlessness made Lin Sun feel inexplicably uncomfortable, as if his heart was blocked by a stone. Old Mo's departure has nothing to do with you. Why did you make such a decision? Young man beside him asked softly. It has something to do with me, Lin Sun said without thinking. If it weren't for me, Ziying battleship wouldn't have been transformed successfully and Meteor's crossbow wouldn't have appeared. If so, do you think what happened today will happen? Young man was about to say something, but she was interrupted by Lin Sun. In my opinion, I don't care about the shitty interests of the Empire. What I care about is that old Mo was taken away. This is the reason why I must seek justice for old Mo. Looking at Lin's chiseled and handsome face, looking at his firm and calm expression, and listening to his powerful words, young man suddenly found that the boy in front of her seemed to have possessed the courage to bear everything by himself unconsciously. This was a kind of broad-mindedness and bearing that only a real man possessed. In the early morning of the next day before dawn, a middle-level Falcon battleship of the Empire roared, and was about to take off. In front of the battleship, Shin Rudi stood with his hands clasped behind his back, looking dignified and cold. When he saw Shu Sanqi send old Mo here in person, a faint sneer flashed across his lips. "Master Mo, please." Shin Rudi stood aside and invited old Mo to board the battleship. "Thank you." Old Mo nodded absent-mindedly and boarded the battleship. However, he couldn't help but look back halfway, but there was nothing but darkness. He couldn't help laughing at himself. Without hesitation, he quickly disappeared in the battleship. "Old man, you should know that you have violated the will of the upper class of the Empire by keeping the teenager named Lin Sun here. It's not easy to bear the consequences." Seeing old Mo disappear, Shin Rudi turned his head and looked at Shu Sanqi lightly, saying, "I hope we still have a chance to fight face to face. Goodbye." He turned around and was about to leave, but Shu Sanqi suddenly said, "Do you know who sent Lin Sun to the bloodthirsty camp?" Shin Rudi suddenly stopped and said, "What? Do you want to pressure me with the power behind the boy? Ridiculous. I represent the will of the Empire. Who am I afraid of offending in the whole world?" With a sneer, he strode to the battleship. As soon as he arrived at the door of the battleship, he heard Shu Sanqi's voice. "The will of the Empire can't be shaken. But I know that there is a groom in the Empire who will never change his attitude because of the will of the Empire." Shin Rudi was slightly stunned, and then seemed to think of something. His face suddenly changed, and he suddenly turned around. When he looked again, Shu Sanqi had disappeared. "Is it the one from Heiyao Shrine?" Until he walked into the battleship, Shin Rudi couldn't calm down. He kept thinking that there was only one groom in the whole Empire who could be mentioned by Shu Sanqi and whose attitude couldn't be shaken by the will of the Empire. Could it be him? A trace of haze appeared on Shin Rudi's face, and he suddenly hated Shu Sanchi. Why did he say such a sentence before leaving? It was so abominable. Boom, the Falcon battleship broke through the sky, crushed the clouds, and fled far away. Soon it disappeared in the vast sky. At the same time, the dawn came, and a ray of dawn tore the eternal night like lightning, illuminating the world. In the camp, Lin Sun silently withdrew his gaze and turned away. The morning light sprinkled on the slender and handsome figure of the teenager, covering him with a layer of illusory luster. No one knew what he was thinking at the moment. On the other side, young man watched the figure of the teenager disappear, and suddenly sighed faintly. She thought of Lin Sun's powerful words last night, and an irresistible thought emerged in her mind. Some hatred, like fate, would take root after a casual twists and turns. Chapter 154. Since old Mo left, Lin Sun became quieter than before. After finishing the training every day, he would return to the warehouse where old Mo was and drink a pot of wine in silence. Young man was a little worried about Lin Sun. She was keenly aware that there was something wrong with Lin Sun's state, but every time she wanted to comfort Lin Sun, she found that he had begun to cultivate. This made young man sigh in her heart and give up the idea of comforting Lin Sun. Some things might be faced alone to mature faster. 13 days later. In the early morning. From today on, 237 trainees from the 8 camps of Bloodthirsty Camp would take the battleship to the Demon Cloud Ridge in the northern border of the Empire to participate in the battlefield assessment. Don't worry. I'll take care of Chirps. Your task is to return safely with a good result. Young man exhorted softly before setting off. Okay. Lin Sun nodded and turned to walk towards Camp 39. Behind him, young man stared at the back of the young man who was more and more handsome and dignified. She thought of the scene when she met Lin Sun for the first time. At that time, Lin Sun was sometimes mischievous, glib-tongued, and sometimes focused, serious, and calm. But most of the time, he always wore a warm smile on his lips, like a harmless sunny boy. But now, he had become different from before, and no one could see through what he was thinking. Was this good or bad? Young man didn't know. Maybe this was growth, which was not defined by age. People would become different when they experienced more. Chirps lay in young man's arms and looked at Lin Sun's back reluctantly with its round black eyes, chirping constantly. A moment later, with a rumbling sound, 8 small Imperial Zing battleships rose into the sky, crushing the clouds and carrying 237 trainees from the 8 camps to the north. How many people do you think can come back this time? No more than 50. 50? This is about twice as many as the previous trainees. I just hope so. How many people do you think will die in the end? It's hard to say. The Demon Cloud Ridge is a test of life and death. There are only 2 outcomes for those who can't persist: elimination or death. Among them, death is inevitable. These are the rules. No matter how extraordinary their backgrounds are or how good their talents are, if they can't endure the tempering of the flames of war, they won't be of much use. I'm just a little worried. The forces behind these trainees are complicated. If something happens, I'm afraid that the Bloodthirsty Camp will be blamed. You're wrong. A large clan will never lack outstanding descendants. Sometimes, the death of a useless descendant is not a bad thing for them. Indeed, in terms of cruelty, the competition within the families of those ancient forces can only be more abnormal than that of our Bloodthirsty Camp. Their descendants fight for more resources and power. Brothers turn against each other and relatives kill each other. This kind of thing has already become common. Just you wait. 3 months from now we'll know how many of these 237 students will be able to stay, and who will be eliminated or die. In the Bloodthirsty Camp, watching the 8 Zing battleships disappear in the northern horizon, a group of drill masters had a brief conversation. In the Zing battleship where the trainees of Camp 39 were, Lin Sun looked at a storage ring in his hand. This was the only spiritual weapon issued in this assessment. In addition, no trainee was allowed to carry other spiritual weapons. This was the rule of the assessment. After arriving at the Demon Cloud Ridge in the northern border of the Empire, the 237 trainees would enter the battlefield to carry out tasks as ordinary soldiers of the Empire. What they had to do was to use all their means to persist in the theater of operations for 3 months like ordinary soldiers. The military merits obtained were the results of the assessment. Those who died would be eliminated, and those with low military merits would also be eliminated. This unified storage ring was prepared for the purpose of collecting military merit. The so-called military merits were the enemy's lives. The atmosphere in the cabin was not quiet. Many people were talking in a low voice. What they were talking about was related to the assessment to the Demon Cloud Ridge. The Demon Cloud Ridge was a theater of operations with complex terrain. It was located in the northern border of the Empire. After crossing the Demon Cloud Ridge, it was the turbulent wasteland controlled by the Empire of the Dark in the north. For hundreds of years, there had been constant wars in the Demon Cloud Ridge. But both the Empire and the Empire of the Dark knew that no matter which side wanted to completely occupy the Demon Cloud Ridge, it was an extremely unlikely thing. The reason was that the terrain of the Demon Cloud Ridge was too complex. It was shrouded in black haze all year round. The area covered thousands of miles and was full of dangers. Unless all the land within thousands of miles of the Demon Cloud Ridge was overturned and flattened, anyone who wanted to occupy this place would have to pay a heavy and immeasurable price. Until now, the existence of the Demon Cloud Ridge had become a buffer zone between the Empire and the Empire of the Dark. Although there were constant wars, they were all small-scale fights. I heard that the current Demon Cloud Ridge has already changed. It is called a training ground between the Empire and the Empire of the Dark. The so-called training ground is to let the young experts of each side know and understand their opponents through real bloody battles. Only through the tempering of blood and fire can they grow into real war talents. Shiryu suddenly lowered his voice and said mysteriously, "This also means that in this assessment in the Demon Cloud Ridge, we are very likely to meet some young experts of the Voodoo Barbarian tribe. When it comes to combat effectiveness, I'm afraid that they are not inferior to us." "Isn't that nonsense?" Ning Meng said angrily. "Nonsense?" Shiryu sneered. "Know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. Idiots like you will not even know how they die when they enter the Demon Cloud Ridge." "You don't have to worry about that," Ning Meng said disdainfully. "Unlike you, I grew up on the battlefield. When it comes to the understanding of war, I dare say that you are not even 1/10 as good as me." Seeing that the two were about to argue again, Lin Sun felt a headache and said, "How about this? You two take the assessment of the Demon Cloud Ridge as a game and have a contest to determine the winner by military merit. Isn't this more convincing than arguing? You can even have a bet. It's up to you what to bet." Shiryu and Ning Meng looked at each other with a touch of anger in their eyes. They nodded together. "That's good. Won't you join in?" Shiryu asked Lin Sun. "Me?" Lin Sun was stunned. "Yes, how can you be absent? Let's have a bet." Ning Meng's eyes lit up and he rubbed his palms together. "Let me think about it. Let's bet 100 Imperial gold coins. Only one person will win, and the two losers will give 100 Imperial gold coins to the winner." 100 Imperial gold coins! Lin Sun gasped. The bet was so big that it was equivalent to 10,000 Imperial silver coins or 1 million Imperial copper coins. Unexpectedly, Shiryu was very dissatisfied with it. He sneered. 100 Imperial gold coins? That's too little. If the bet is so little, I don't want to bet. Lin Sun was speechless. This was the style of the third child of Keystone business. Even 100 Imperial gold coins were too little. What a rich man! How much do you want to bet? Ning Meng said unhappily. At least 1,000 Imperial gold coins, plus one condition. Shiryu said with a smile. The condition is very simple. If you lose, you should take the initiative to admit defeat and apologize to me. Admit that you are not as good as me and admit that you are not as good as me. Ning Meng's face changed. He gritted his teeth and said, "Okay. Sure." You chuckled. "Great." Lin Sun couldn't help saying, "You too. I can't get 1,000 imperial gold coins for the time being. You can owe it to me first." "Sure." You and Ning Meng said almost at the same time. Lin Sun couldn't help but get angry when he saw that the two were determined to defeat him. But he didn't show it on his face. He gently spat out a word, "Okay." At this time, a harsh sneer suddenly came from the other side of the cabin. "Someone is really a gambler. Do you think that the fight with Shirao Kun a few days ago was a glorious victory?" Lin Sun, Shi Yu and Ning Meng all looked over. It was a pale-skinned teenager with a surly look. His name was Hu Long. Like Li Duxing, he was one of the trainees who were incorporated into Camp 39 after the quarterly assessment. Staying in the quarterly assessment had fully proved that Hu Long's fighting capacity was not weak. And some clues could also be seen from his average score. But at this moment, he sneered. Although he said, "someone," he actually pointed at Lin Sun and taunted him. Hu Long opened his mouth with a touch of provocation, which immediately attracted the attention of many trainees in the cabin. Seeing this, Hu Long didn't intend to stop at all. Instead, he became more complacent and said disdainfully, "In the current bloodthirsty camp, who doesn't know that Shirao Kun's defeat is not because of his weak fighting capacity?" Originally, Bai Lingshi couldn't bear to see someone lose and make a fool of himself, so she stopped the fight. Unexpectedly, someone was not ashamed of it, but proud of it. He boasted that he was the winner, which really disgraced our Camp 39. This kind of argument was indeed spread in the bloodthirsty camp, but many people also understood that Lin Sun was absolutely not as weak as Hu Long said. If the fight really went to the end, it was hard to say who would win. However, many people could see that Hu Long was deliberately satirizing Lin Sun. In addition, many of them didn't have a good relationship with Lin Sun, so no one wanted to get involved. Shi Yu and Ning Meng frowned and wanted to say something, but they were stopped by Lin Sun, who said, "A dog barks randomly. Are you going to reason with a dog?" Hu Long's face suddenly changed and he screamed, "Who are you scolding?" Lin Sun smiled and said, "A dog." Hu Long snapped, "I'm asking, who are you scolding as a dog?" Lin Sun shrugged and said, "A dog knows it." Hu Long got angry at once. He suddenly stood up and pointed at Lin Sun, saying, "Don't you dare to admit that you scolded me?" Lin Sun said with a smile, "If you admit that you are a dog, then I will scold you. Why don't you prove to everyone that you are a dog now?" Would Hu Long prove that he was a dog? Definitely not. It was too humiliating. But who didn't know that Lin Sun scolded him? Hearing this kind of quarrel, many people couldn't help but feel happy, and some even laughed out. Hu Long's face suddenly turned red, and he was so angry that smoke came out of his 7 orifices. He trembled all over and roared, "Someone dares to do it, but dares not to admit it. If I am a dog, someone is even worse than a dog." In a word, he compared himself to a dog and Lin Sun to a person who was even worse than a dog. Hearing this, many people couldn't help but burst into laughter, and tears almost fell down. How could people scold each other like this? This guy's brain must have been damaged by anger. Chapter 155. Lin Sun couldn't help but be stunned. He had never seen a guy who would blacken himself in order to blacken his opponent. It was simply insane. Hu Long was already furious. He immediately realized that he had said something wrong, but what was done could not be undone. It was too late for him to redeem himself. Listening to the laughter of the people in the cabin, Hu Long's face changed and he hated Lin Sun more and more. If Lin Sun hadn't called him a dog first, how could he have become like this? Damn it! Hu Long, who was angry and ashamed, suddenly saw that Lin Sun looked a little gloomy. He couldn't help but sneer. What? Someone can't bear this kind of innuendo attack? Lin Sun sighed. He didn't even bother to evaluate Hulong's IQ. He wondered how such a simple-minded guy passed the quarterly assessment and stayed. Seeing that Lin Sun didn't say anything, Hulong seemed to have found an outlet to vent his anger. He raised his proud head and said coldly, "Don't be a coward. Aren't you good at talking? If you have the ability, don't talk nonsense. Come and hit me directly. Do you dare?" All the people jeered. Hulong was not stupid. He knew that no one dared to act recklessly in the cabin where all the trainees were present, so he used this to provoke Lin Sun. Would Lin Sun be a coward? Definitely not. But would Lin Sun beat him? Probably not. This was the same trick that Lin Sun just asked Hulong to prove whether he was a dog or not. Boom. Unexpectedly, in the face of Hulong's provocation, Lin Sun didn't talk nonsense. He immediately got up, strode forward and punched Hulong. It happened in a hurry. Even Hulong didn't expect that Lin Sun would really dare to beat him. As a result, he was punched hard in the abdomen. With a bang, Hulong felt as if his stomach was about to explode. A terrifying force fiercely rushed into his body like a tide, shaking his internal organs to the point that they seemed to shift positions. Under the intense pain, his entire body was like a cooked prawn, and he let out a blood-curdling howl. "Lin Sun, you motherf *cur!" Hulong roared, but before he could finish, he was hit on the back by a palm. His whole body fell to the ground with a plop like a toad. He was in so much pain that tears and snot flowed down his face. He could not make any other sound except for screaming. Everyone was in an uproar, and they all wore expressions of disbelief. But Lin Sun smiled at the people around him and said calmly, "Everyone heard that this guy asked me to beat him. It's the first time for me to hear such a request. How can I refuse his kindness?" Everyone was speechless. Hearing Lin Sun's words, Hulong was so angry that he almost vomited blood. With a bang, the cabin door was opened, revealing an exceptionally tall and sturdy figure. Just by standing there, he gave off an oppressive feeling. This man was Dong Lu, the drill master responsible for leading the trainees of Camp 39 to the Demon Cloud Ridge to participate in the war zone assessment. "What's going on? Do you want to experience the feeling of violating the rules of the camp?" Dong Lu's face was grim as he glanced coldly at Lin Sun and Hulong on the ground. "Instructor," he started it. Hulong wailed and struggled to get up, but Lin Sun stamped him on the ground. "Little fellow, what do you have to say?" Dong Lu asked in a low, muffled voice. "It was he who asked me to beat him. It's not my fault. Everyone here can testify that. Otherwise, I'm not interested in bullying such a weak chicken." Lin Sun answered seriously. Dong Lu was stunned and glanced at the crowd. Seeing that no one refuted Lin Sun's words, he couldn't help but look a little strange. "You're lying." Hulong was so angry that his lungs were about to explode. He shouted loudly, "Instructor, have you ever seen such a person?" He asked to be beaten and refused to admit it. He must be out of his mind. Lin Sun sighed helplessly. "I think this guy is a real bitch." Dong Lu vaguely understood, and his expression became more and more strange. He stared at Hulong on the ground, who was about to go mad with anger for a long time, and then snorted coldly, "This is the end of it. If I find any of you wantonly fight again, get out of here no matter what the reason is." Saying this, he turned around and walked out of the cabin, slamming the door. But at the moment when the door was closed, many people with sensitive ears vaguely heard that Dong Lu seemed to mutter in a low voice, "What a bitch!" All of a sudden, the faces of many trainees also became strange, and they looked at Hulong with a touch of pity in their eyes. It was a good provocation, but he was not only beaten violently, but also regarded as a bitch by the instructor. Who else could be blamed for it? Lin Sun returned to his seat, calm and composed, as if what happened just now had nothing to do with him. "Awesome. Sure, you raised his thumb." "Haha, it's awesome." Ning Meng laughed. Lin Sun smiled and said nothing. This episode passed quickly, but many trainees in the cabin looked at Lin Sun with extremely gloomy fear. No one dared to despise those who didn't play according to common sense. 8 Ziying battleships flew in the sky for 7 days. Finally, in the evening of the 7th day, they landed in a military place called Heifeng on the northern border of the empire. Heifeng Army was a large-scale official army in the northern border of the empire, with 300,000 soldiers and 50,000 practitioners. It was under the command of Wu Xinglie, a lieutenant general with outstanding military exploits. The sunset was like fire. Banners were fluttering in the camp, and the discipline was strict. In one of the open spaces, 237 trainees of the bloodthirsty camp walked out of the battleships one after another, and then they were led by their respective instructors into 8 tents that had been prepared for a long time. Old song, I'll leave these little guys to you. 3 months later, I'll come to check the assessment result. In one of the camps, Dong Lu said to a middle-aged man who came to greet him. The middle-aged man was dressed in a military uniform and silver armor. He looked resolute, and his whole body was suffused with a penetrating sense of killing. Obviously, he had been on the battlefield for a long time. His name was Song Ling, a senior colonel in the Heifeng army. Okay. Song Ling was obviously a man of few words. Hearing this, he glanced at Lin Sun and other trainees and nodded. Then, he sent someone to fetch a map and a bag, and distributed them to Lin Sun and other trainees. Then he said, "From today on, you are members of the Heifeng army. Although your identity is special, if you can't finish the task, you will also be punished according to the military rules." His words were powerful and sonorous, and the wanton sense of killing made everyone's heart skip a beat. Seeing this, Dong Lu left the tent without a trace. His task had been completed, and he only needed to come to pick up the trainees 3 months later. From tonight on, you will be divided into groups, carry your own equipment, and enter the Demon Cloud Ridge to fight. The task requires you to kill all the strong voodoo barbarians you meet. For every totem barbarian tattoo you get, you will be recorded as a military merit. The time for carrying out the task is 3 months. During this period, anyone who escapes without permission will be killed. Anyone who colludes with the enemy will be killed. Anyone who kills his companions will be killed. Song Ling said the word "kill" 3 times in a row, which made all the trainees realize that everything here was indeed different from that in the bloodthirsty camp. This was the real military camp, the front line of fighting with the enemy, and the most ruthless battlefield. Here, military orders were as important as mountains, and military discipline was as solid as iron. At last, Song Ling's eyes flashed with a sharp and dazzling light. He glanced at the trainees and said, "The most important thing is that anyone who betrays the enemy will have his 9 families killed." This was the most frightening punishment. It was night. The sky above the Demon Cloud Ridge was covered with thick dark clouds. Only a few strands of dim moonlight squeezed through the clouds, giving off an oppressive gray luster. In a mountain, Lin Sun flew between rocks and trees like a nimble leopard cat. The environment here was so dark that he could hardly see his own fingers. Lin Sun's eyesight was greatly affected. Fortunately, his soul perception was so powerful that he could clearly detect all the movements within a radius of 100 meters. Like Lin Sun, other trainees of the bloodthirsty camp, who came to participate in the war zone task, all entered the Demon Cloud Ridge before the night fell. Some chose to go forward in a team, and some chose to act alone like Lin Sun. According to the information, there are many scattered voodoo barbarians in the Demon Cloud Ridge. Some of them act alone, and some are in teams. It seems that I have to be careful. Lin Sun held the saber in his hand tightly while thinking about the information he got before he set out. This saber was a standard spiritual weapon of the Imperial military named Army Destroyer. Its quality was not very good, but it was sharp enough. In addition to the Army Destroyer, Lin Sun and other trainees were also assigned a map, an inner armor, and a whistle for seeking help. The map of the Demon Cloud Ridge was extremely rough and could only be used as a reference. The inner armor was called iron scale armor, which was also a standard equipment of the Empire. It was neither good nor bad, and its defensive power was just passable. The whistle for seeking help was very unique. It was small and exquisite like an eagle's beak. As long as it was blown, it would make a unique whistle and wave, which would be perceived by the top overmatches outside the Demon Cloud Ridge. But once the whistle was blown, it meant that the trainees were eliminated. Moreover, it was not necessarily that they could get help in time by blowing the whistle. Therefore, this thing could only be regarded as dispensable. If they wanted to stay alive, they had to rely on themselves. In the next 3 months, besides fighting with unknown number of enemies, there is no supply of materials. It's a tough time. It seems that I have to make a plan before taking action. I can't be too anxious to kill the enemies. It's imperative to adapt to the environment here first. While thinking, Lin Sun suddenly seemed to notice something. He jumped on a low hill quietly, clung to the rock, and quietly restrained his breath. Not long after, a black leopard beast walked over from the bushes in the distance. Its agile body was faintly discernible, like a ghost flying in the night. It was just a black spiritual leopard on the 8th level of martial realm, which was no threat to Lin Sun at all. Lin Sun was about to get up and leave, but at this moment, he suddenly felt something wrong. He keenly realized that he seemed to have neglected something. He released the power of his soul perception, which spread like a tide. It didn't take long for him to notice that behind the black spiritual leopard, there was a figure, as ethereal as a wisp of black smoke, perfectly integrated with the night. It was impossible to detect its trace with the naked eye. What a cunning guy! He uses a black spiritual leopard to explore the way while he hides in the dark. If I show up just now, I'm afraid that I'll be targeted in an instant. Lin Sun was shocked.